glad to see some moms out there, just saying. Welcome. We're going to talk about the budget tonight, so I'm assuming that's why you're all so interested. The first thing we have is a joint meeting with the Finance Committee, and mostly the budget involves the Finance Committee, and so we post it as a joint meeting so that if they're all here, which they are, everything's legal. Is there anything the Finance Committee wants to talk about before we continue?
Linda has something she'd like to say.
For those of you who don't know, this is Linda Summer. She's on the Finance Committee.
For the record, the Finance Committee did not have access to the DLS's review of the budget process before the press received it. Therefore, we could not respond before the press reacted to the report. It has been most unpleasant for those of us currently on the Finance Committee to be singled out and pilloried in the press for the budget fiascos of the last 2 years. These failures should be attributed to internal and structural problems, including an unresponsive interim town administrator, a largely unengaged board of selectmen.
All right, stop right there. Please. That's all inflammatory. I take offense to that.
I said largely unengaged.
I would take offense to that. To your point.
I would like to hear her letter.
A lack of written financial policies and procedures, and a local budget process long outdated and archaic. With this kind of publicity, Southampton is going to be hard-pressed to attract people who want to volunteer for town committees and who will run for public office. As a member of the Finance Committee, speaking only for myself, I strongly endorse most of the report's recommendations and all of those pertaining to the budget process. For the last 3 years that I have served on the Finance Committee, I have expressed dismay that an annual budget of more than $14 million was prepared by only 1 or 2 volunteers, a different one each year, who, by the way, are no longer on the Finance Committee. I have always believed the budget should be prepared by the town administrator, town accountant, and town treasurer, who have the access, financial information, and authority that volunteers do not have. The Finance Committee should have review authority and should make recommendations to voters at the annual town meeting. In the past, I have recommended a firm timeline for preparing the budget, beginning in early fall for the following fiscal year. The Board of Selectmen should complete the budget by late winter so that there is time to clearly explain it to voters before the annual town meeting. In the past, I have recommended a long-term financial plan for the town and indeed drafted an outline for such a plan last summer. It has not been completed because we were awaiting the DLS report and still wait for a 5-year financial projection of revenue and expenses from the town. In the past, I have recommended revisiting the 5 towns agreement for governance of the Hampshire Regional School District. Without weighted representation, Southampton, which since the majority of students has no authority to control school expenses. This has been a major factor in the town using all its financial reserves, and now finding itself in dire fiscal condition. I have often deplored the Board of Selectmen's lack of fiscal discipline and repeated caving into special interests. Accountability, transparency, and professionalism in all departments should be the norm. Without the recommended changes and also the willingness of taxpayers to accept the reality of this crisis, I predict Southampton will soon be closing or defunding many of its departments, including the Council on Aging, the Parks Commission, EMT Service, Edwards Public Library, and more. As a retired public library director, I find the latter particularly egregious. Would this be a town most of us want to live in? I think not. I enjoy my home, my neighborhood, and the natural beauty of the area. I truly hope the Board of Selectmen will adopt these recommendations and that town leaders and taxpayers will find a way to work together to set Southampton's fiscal house in order.
Thank you.
No, I have a few comments. I wish you would go back 10 years, like my experience is. The Board of Selectmen is a volunteer group of people that want to serve the town. And we have tried to develop systems to be in place to support that. And so back when Diane Schindler was hired, 2006 or 2007, The finance committee took the budget and handed it to her. They actually physically walked in and put it on her desk, walked out. So Diana was new in town, and she had to put the budget together, which she was able to do. So there was a strong town administrator role versus a weak finance committee role. We've always, on the Board of Selectmen, tried to listen to the departments and meet their needs. As time went on and Diana left, there was a vacuum with having the temporary administrator in the office. I realized that. That's why that person is not the administrator. Finance took back over the budgetary process with John Martin, and John can attest to some of this. So now we have a town administrator who's more involved in taking over the budget process. Regardless of what happens, there's just no money at all. There's no money to manage for anything. So if you're going to sit here and say that the library loses its funding because of the selectmen, that's a misstatement.
That's not what I said.
And you're going to say that EMS services are going to be lost because the selectmen mismanage money, and I'm hearing this from people. There's no money to mismanage.
That's not what I said.
There's no money to mismanage. When 2008 hit, we had 11% budget cut from the state in November. So how the hell do you balance?
Point of order.
Point of order, excuse me, this is not a
This is a
town meeting.
formal meeting.
It's a formal meeting. But my point being is that
Language is unnecessary, Madam Chairman.
But my point being is that there have been budget cuts year after year from the state in our funding that we've had to turn around and take money out of the town. Let me finish with the school as well. There were attempts in the past to take back control of the regional school with meetings with other towns. The other towns didn't want to be involved. We had meetings at the regional. They didn't want to get involved. And every year the regional school would pick off one town and fit 4 against 1. And that's how they kept control. Heather has been going up there recently trying to bring that back together and communicating with the other towns to get that back together. There's some things that we don't have any control over.
I would like to say, I don't think that Linda's letter is a reflection so much on the Board of Selectmen as much as it is a reflection on the way the town runs as a whole. And I think that's what we need to pay attention to. And so, although I see where you're going, and I see your point of view from years past, that's years past. And at this point, we need to take what we have and figure out a way that's going to work going forward. We can talk about 10 years ago and what we did with money and how we figured it out and who did what when, but to Linda's point, those people aren't even here anymore, with the exception of a few. I'm not disregarding the work that they've done, but we need to take what we have now and figure out something that works, that's going to invest people and their time and their money and make Southampton what we want it to
What
be.
you're hearing from me is the frustration of budgetary cuts, budgetary cuts, budgetary cuts.
And what you're hearing from Linda
And
is her
level funding.
frustration in the way that the way the town
There's-
runs.
Right, but it runs by a democracy. And we have tried twice to follow the original DOR recommendations in 2004, which were to have a public works department shut down, appoint the town, the tax collector shut down, appoint the town clerk shut down.
Mhm.
Recommendations over and over from finance every single year since 2008 for 2.5 override, shot down. The people in this town have voted for that. So if the people vote to do those things, to not follow the DOR's recommendation 2004, 2005, to not follow the finance committee's recommendations for the past 7 years, 6 to 7 years regarding a 2.5 override, then we're stuck with what we have. The voters have said what they want the town government to do. There's no money.
You're stuck with the money that they allow you to spend, but you're not stuck in the way that you manage it. You're not stuck in the way that you move forward. So if getting more money isn't working, then you figure out a different way to structure things, a different way to move forward, and then you educate the people on the changes that you've made give them the information that they're looking for, and then hope that they understand enough to vote for an override, to elect the town. Well, I'm saying that you have to keep trying. I'm saying, and to Linda's point, I think you need to continue to keep trying.
There's not enough fuel in the budget for control. There's not enough money in the highway department to fix the plows that get broken when they plow.
The money, though, is not, the amount of money right now is not the issue. The way you manage the money is the issue. The way you do the process is the issue.
I would disagree
Not,
with that. There's
not,
enough
Linda's
money.
point is not how much money we have, it's how the process and the budget is controlled and how the town is run. It's not, you have $10 million or you have $14 million. That's not any part of that conversation. Go ahead.
Okay, can I just add to that?
Yes.
Or one to some other things, but what you're saying about, the frustration among townspeople in not understanding, I think perhaps, it's the process that you're describing people don't agree with. And until we change that process, they are probably not going to be in favor of any override. And that's just my take on it. And it also comes with the amount of information that people have and the transparency of that information that help people better understand what the real situation is in this town. And I don't believe we did a good job of communicating exactly how difficult it was, or maybe we did. And maybe we're just going to have to keep going back to the well and repeating and repeating and repeating in the hopes, of getting more of what we need. But in the meantime, we have to live within our means.
Right.
And I think, if I could just go on, is that we do have something in addition to what Linda wrote on her own. Certainly, we have some recommendations that we think are constructive that we would like to put forward.
Are they inconsistent with the DLS report? Is that something that we can?
Some of them, yeah.
Some of it. So you want me to go?
I just would like to know if there's anyone else on the board that would like to respond to Linda's letter.
I do, and I agree a lot with what Linda said, because I was on the finance committee and chairing it. It's frustrating. I think we have two problems. One, I think we all know we need more money to run the departments at the highest level we can, but we don't have it. And I think the issue that the finance committee was struggling at, myself included when I was there, and that's why I'm sitting here, is that the money that we have, we don't manage well. We constantly spend the free cash. We don't put enough in stabilization, either operational or capital, because we give in when a department comes to us and says, well, I overran my budget, and we say, okay, we'll take it. We have never held the departments to a level of the budget that was approved. I mean, we're starting to do.
John, I would disagree with that.
Okay, let me finish, and that's fine. In the past, we've always used all the free cash up that we have. We've always had budgets overrun at the
I
end of
always use all the free cash.
You didn't interrupt, so let him finish.
I just want to make sure that you're saying what you're saying is correct.
I'll tell you what, after I say it, you can rebut it. How's that? So we established a budget. Last year, we had a balanced budget. We presented it. And the select board has not been real friendly towards our budgets in the past. A lot of them look at the finance committee like, you're an advisory committee, fine. That's fine, we'll take it. I was sitting on that side, and I'm sitting on this side, so that's my take on it. But we have a budget this year that is balanced. We're already running probably $40,000 over if we extrapolate the information right. Increase, you're saying more? Okay, so we've got to manage the budget we have. And I think in the past, we've told people we can't manage the budget properly, but they haven't seen any services cut. They haven't seen anything go down. We have more policemen, more highway, more, well.
We don't have more policemen.
We do.
Less
We
policemen
do
since
than
I
5,
started.
6 years ago. That's not true.
But since I started, there are less policemen.
But I think the key is the town sees us saying these things and nothing happens. And somebody has said years ago, well, when they feel the pain, they'll recognize it. I mean, we're spending money we don't have, and we're managing it poorly. We need to have a good fiscal management style that I think if we don't do it this year, we're gonna go more in the hole next year. We don't manage our money well, and we've gotta be tough about it. We can't let, the building inspector position, I wanted to look at it for an opportunity, but we had a group of people that came here and said, whoa, it's gonna slow down the permits. It's gonna slow down the time that somebody's available. Darn right it is.
But John, you weren't here to defend that position.
I was sitting here a couple of times.
Not the nights I was here.
Well, I was here a couple times, but the key is, it's gonna take something to let people say, okay, If I have to wait, in this particular case with the building inspector, if I have to wait till a Monday or a Friday for a building permit, I'll wait. It's not a big deal. I'm sorry. If I have to, town hall is only open 3 days a week and I can't get here for a certain time, that's not good, but that's gonna have to happen before people out there realize that we don't have the money. And I think the DOA, had a lot of great points in there. DOA. Had a lot of great points to it. That, it's just telling us what we already know. What are we willing to do? We can't be too soft. We got hired, elected to do the job. Are we gonna do it or not? That's my thought. And if you wanna rebut some of what I said,
No, John, it's, having been here since '04, I've seen services go down and go down and go down and go down and down. And, Mr. Colley was in the highway, and what Ed did was a public works level of stuff by stealing from Paul to pay Peter the whole time. And it takes a certain kind of manager to do that, and I'm hoping Randall's that kind of manager. But Ed made personal and physical sacrifices of himself to the town that he's paying for now. And that was in his effort to make do with less and less and less each year. I hear what you're all saying, and I try to stay optimistic, but there's just not enough money to get the services in the town, to preserve the quality of life in this town, to make sure the roads get done, the drainage ditches get cleaned out, the EMS services is paid for, there's fuel for the cops to patrol. All of that stuff is paid for. We don't have enough money for that. When insurance goes up or fuel costs go up, that has to come from somewhere. When the vocational, Smith Vocational goes from 800 to 400,000 to 800,000, where's the money come from?
I think we all agree 100%. That's how we manage it. But Hampshire Regional is 56% of the budget. I mean, I'm sorry, but
John, there were attempts in the past to reel that in.
and they weren't good. So what do we do now? Do we just give up and say we tried it in the
And
past?
as DLS said, we're in violation of the state law, that mandates that we should reapportion that committees, our support that committee, so we need to do that.
Before I move on to the suggestions from the Finance Committee, did you have anything you wanted to say in response to Linda's letter?
No, but, well, I just feel like, I've been 3 years and I'm in my second term, and I've seen a lot of hard times by the department heads, and I think a lot of them are doing the best they can, and I don't see them being extravagant. I see
I'm
them
not saying they're
trying to stay
extravagant.
tight with everything they're doing, and they're having a hard time, and they're trying really hard. So I don't feel comfortable blaming the department heads for this. I think it's just that we don't have enough, money coming in, and it's really tight, and the school's taking a lot of our budget. So
I mean, what Ed Colley does, what all the department heads do to try to get their extra money, fire chief, police chief, I applaud them for it because they're doing their job trying to get the money. So I don't fault them at all. I think they're doing a great job. But we don't have enough money to do what they need to do. So how do we manage the money we have?
right, and that's why we're here.
But we gotta make some hard decisions.
Yeah.
At this point, I'd like to hear your suggestions moving forward, Finance Committee.
So we wrote them down, and everybody has a copy.
Thanks.
Just a one-pager?
Pardon?
Just a one-pager?
Single space.
One page. She does that's the first turnout. Anyway, none of this is new to those of us who've been on the Finance Committee, and I can say, to Lynn has seniority, because she's been on for a little more than 3 years, and I've been on for a little more than 2, so you see, we don't have a lot of depth to our bench.
And the only reason I'm on is because it was just gonna be these 2 people on the Finance Committee, so I did a writing campaign because I didn't want 2 people on the Finance Committee. And, I think, and Linda did the same thing, she did it again, because.
We step forward. But anyway, but what this says is that, first and foremost, we support all the recommendations of the DLS report. We have been reorganized and the process has changed in the town to be be, more efficient and more transparent. I think those words need to go hand in hand. We talked about, and Janet mentioned, that they cited Massachusetts General Law section that said that regardless, I think, of the agreement that we have with the other towns for the regional school committee, that the number of representatives on the school committee are supposed to be somewhat proportionate to the student enrollment, which translates into our financial obligation to the district. And so that needs to be looked at. We need to have, we said it for a number of years on the finance committee, we need to find a way of having our voice heard, because not this year, but the year before, the bill came to almost a $500,000 increase, and it came out of everybody else's pocket. And it's not that I'm begrudging anything in the school, but I think everybody needs to take a very hard look at all of their money. And the school shouldn't be something that's, you know, outside of our purview. They seem to operate independently. So that we want to look at that.
What would you say to the school committee? I mean, people get on different committees because of what they want to get involved with.
Mhm.
So my experience has been that people get on the school committee are sort of advocating
Mhm.
for the school.
Mhm.
And so it's, when they're sitting there at the table, they're advocating for the school, which a lot of times is getting money to the school to do all the interesting programs that they want to do. So we have representatives on the school committee that may actually be not having the same interests as you have.
But I think everybody needs to understand that we all have to operate within a certain budget.
There was a year we asked for no raises.
If they were aware of the situation, would they make different decisions?
Well, but at least if the representative, Southampton has that right proportion of representation, and they make that decision, then shame on them, but at least we're given the opportunity.
I think we need to go further and push for weighted voting on the budget also among the 5 towns.
But don't forget, there were 2 spots that no one put their names in for. We had to have 2 write-in candidates because nobody stepped up to be on that board.
Nobody-
So,
We would have been 2 people short.
Same thing.
Same thing with you guys.
And nobody's citing them as the, you know, blame.
No, I'm just saying, it's the same situation.
Can I stop for 1 second? When I had seen Craig about this, he seemed to think that the information in the DLS report regarding this was wrong. Did you?
So the update on this matter is as follows. I've been back and forth with Craig on this. I've also been back and forth with Rick Kingsley, who is the representative from DLS, who also wrote the report, but he may have pros, he may have cons. He's phenomenal in the fact that every time I call, he calls me back. He'll spend 2 hours on the phone with me if I have any question to go over everything. I've also spoken with Christine at DESI, and we've gone over this as well. So essentially, the argument on Craig's end was back in 1989, he believed that there was an amendment, I believe it's amendment number 6, that was passed to amend Hampshire Regional's agreement by all 5 towns. And he was asking for, after the report came out, the actual town meeting votes from each of the individual towns pertaining to this vote. I then went and spoke with Janine, who is our town clerk, to see if we could get copies of this or whatever transpired in 1989 pertaining to Hampshire Regional. In 1989, there was only 1 vote that pertained to Hampshire Regional, nothing that happened the years prior, nothing that happened in the years that immediately followed, and the vote had something to do with finances. It did not have to do with the actual proportioning of the vote. Now, when you talk to DESI, how things generally work with the regional agreements is as follows. The regional school will submit the proposal for an amendment to DESI. DESI will say, okay, looks beautiful. They approve it, and then it goes to town meeting vote. The copy of the regional agreement that Rick had obtained was from DESI. It was the approved version. Translation, amendment number 6, that he claims actually solves this problem, was never approved by DESI. So you have the first problem, that DESI doesn't have a record of it, so they never saw amendment number 6, which he claims solves this problem and does it proportionally. And I think it's actually proportional to the population of the town, not to the enrollment, as I understand it from Rick. The second problem you have is, you could say all the towns voted for it, perhaps, but I can tell you based on the records we have in our clerk's office, Town of Southampton didn't, and the only action they took on the vote that did pertain to Hampshire Regional in 1989 was to table it. So that's another issue. The question is, at this point, it's been so many years, what are you gonna say? I mean, theoretically, if that's the way they've been operating, that's the way they've been operating. But it's not as simple as, okay, well, we can just make this happen. Whenever you make any amendments to the regional agreement, you have to actually have approval from all 5 towns at town meeting. Seems simple, it would be if it was in everybody's favor and best interest to do so. You're asking 4 towns to sign on to something that, let's be honest, is not in their best interest. It's in our best interest, that's great. Give us the power, give us the power. The other 4 communities, not in their best interest.
But if it's mass general law, I mean, I'm just so.
You have to sue the towns then.
It's one thing to tell them they're acting against it, it's another thing to tell them they need to comply and you're waiting for them to do it and you just tap your foot while you're waiting.
Okay, so I think we all agree that probably this agreement needs to be looked at again, conversation needs to be had about it, and we, Dr. Durkinson and Desi
Can I
and,
just call this thought process for a second?
sure.
So say we do get a weighted vote, and say the school committee says we're gonna do a 10% decrease in our contribution. We're still outvoted by 4 other towns, aren't we?
I have to get a weighted vote, right?
We have,
Okay.
Amount of pupils.
I mean, I think we can go and on about this, of what would happen, what could happen. Maybe the bigger issue here is what Vicky brought up, is that people aren't willing to sign up in the first place.
But I just
So
wanna-
let's tackle one problem at a
Well, I just
time.
wanna go one step further, is that when they look at, we were at the bottom of the 6 from the bottom, for money spent per pupil.
Third.
At one time, we're lower now?
Oh, yeah.
So, if we're 3rd from the bottom, and we're talking about cutting money from the regional, that probably would put us close to the bottom of money spent per pupil.
What you don't look at though is how much does it cost to educate a pupil in Boston?
But I'm just saying, well, there's 354 towns. There's 354 towns, John, including towns out in Hancock, out in, all the other small towns. So we're talking, just, if you wanna talk Western Mass, we could break it up Western Mass, or whatever. But my point being is, we may be chasing something to say we wanna save money on something, but the truth of the matter is, there's no real money to be saved because we're already at the bottom of the pool. So we could chase after that and say it's 57% of our budget, but we cut that, how much more do we cut from the student's education to drive it down lower out of 354 communities in Massachusetts?
Well, one of the options is, if we were able to get out of it, do we want to join Easthampton, for instance, for high school, and make that Easthampton, Southampton? I mean, just because we spend X amount per student, they get a great education. These students are well educated. My kids went through there. I think they do a great job. So the per capita, I don't think is necessarily the indication, or per pupil is the indication of the quality of education.
But one would have to say, if we're 3rd in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that says something.
Oh,
Of
sure.
354 county, or 354 communities, that does say something.
It doesn't say we're not getting well
Let's
educated.
move forward
But I
and
just
keep,
wanna make sure that we're chasing something that's actually gonna
let's do
have
some
a
investigation on
fruitful
point.
outcome at the end.
But more so than just looking for ways to cut things, we should have the right to voice an opinion that's weighted with what we're paying for. Because right now, whether it saves money or not is irrelevant, because we're gonna be outvoted every single time, and we're gonna bear the expense of it. And it's always to our detriment. We should at least have a vote that's proportionate and a fair representation.
I agree with
I
what you're
think
saying.
is what is, more so, we're not so much talking about cutting money as much as having, the vote that corresponds with what we're paying for.
I was just thinking that we're doing this to find ways to save money for the town, and where we're gonna push this, even if we had a way to vote, are we really gonna make our town the last town out of 353 or 354 towns, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, for how much money they pay for the students' education? We really wanna do that? Is that really where we wanna go?
I think what Dana says, that's not where we're going.
Anyway, right now, our vote's almost irrelevant, because if we go to town meeting, the other 4 towns are always gonna vote against us, because we're bearing a majority of the burden.
But I guess what I'm saying is, if you had, say you had a weighted vote,
At least
Which-
the town has made the choice.
Right.
To
But would
pay
you-
for this,
but would you vote to make it less? is my question, because if you're not gonna vote to make it less, you maybe, it's great to have a way to vote, but if you're not voting to make it less, which the school committee's not going to do, you're not gonna save any money from number one. It's not gonna save any money for the town. And we're here for, basically for the whole town. I'm just saying that argument goes down the road, but the road's gonna be in the same place it is today.
I think if I can real quick, I think what Amanda's getting at is in the situation where a few years ago, Hampshire Regional increased their budget by over 11%, that would be an opportune moment for our proportionate vote to kick in, because at that point, if all of the members at least had an understanding of what was happening with the budget, they'd be like 11%, there's no way the town's going to survive paying 11% when all the other communities combined are not paying what Southampton's going to pay.
We actually have no leverage, and I think the leverage is what we would get.
Well, this-
So we could go back to a negotiating point and say, okay, we're not going to approve it, let's see how we can work with you to come up with a better way.
Right, just because I'm an old dog, I've been here too long, perhaps. School committee member at the annual town meeting, I forget what year it is, $100,000 less that we approved. Because of our budget, we said, we're not gonna expend this extra $100,000. And so she comes up to the microphone and says, I propose a Prop 2.5 override to cover that $100,000. You know what happened?
Nothing.
Prop 2.5 override failed, and that $100,000 then came out of the $3 or $4 million that we could budget.
Yeah.
So then it was a hit to that portion, and Hampshire Regional still got what they wanted. That was a school committee member who did that.
But if we had veto power, the process would be a lot different.
But the school committee would have a veto power, not the board of selectmen.
But again, it's the right thing to do, so.
Let's move on.
Gee, I think Francine's finished.
Oh, no.
No, I'm not. We have a list.
We're on number
That was
2.
number one.
I don't need to go through each and every one of them. but
I think that we're gonna talk about number 2.
Okay, we're gonna talk about number two.
Yep, that's on my list of things to talk about.
Okay.
In case anybody wants to know, it's who's in charge of the budget this year, so that's on our agenda.
But, and I guess, so, this other point is that, John did get elected to the select board, so he worked on the budget mainly, and then with Heather, and then we were left as a finance committee without the in-depth knowledge, and why could we not call on John to present on behalf of the finance committee the budget, even though he was on the select board, but 2 weeks earlier, he presented on the budget. So, I mean, this whole timing was.
Some of this is in response to what was in the newspaper, as if we abdicated our responsibility. We did not.
So which newspaper are you talking about?
It was in the
Gazette,
Republic.
yes.
Why do you read the Gazette?
It
That's
was
why.
on the front page. Okay.
cares
Anyway,
about
So
that?
the
let's
election,
go back
the
to
election,
that.
number 3 is about elections and when they're held. And I've often thought, why are we holding a special election in May, which costs money, when they could be held at the same time in November, when there's probably already one anyway. So I don't know if there's a reason for that, Mr. Moderator, do you know, or no?
There is actually a logistical
There
thing
is.
to it, and it comes down to when you have a state or a federal election, you have to have your own set of election workers and your own set of all machinery. Everything has to be separate when you have a state versus a local election. So it costs more money to do it that way, and we already have trouble sometimes just finding 8 poll workers. But most of the towns have their annual town elections in the months of May, April, and June. Perhaps what the finance committee would recommend and probably follow with is the idea that maybe it might be worth taking a look in our bylaws over time to go back and say, well, maybe it would make more sense to have our annual town meeting prior to the annual town election, so you actually have the same people in those positions before you have,
Before they move off.
yes, thank you.
How does one make a change like that, Mr. Moderator?
Robert Floyd, 15 East Street, town moderator. Historically, towns in the Commonwealth would vote and then later on have an annual town meeting at the same place and same day. That's how it all started. But contacting Boston and getting guidance on changing the date. We did change it. It was in June, and then we kicked it back.
I'm just thinking, even if you stayed in May and just put the annual town meeting first and move the elections until after, is that something you can do without,
You need to change the bylaw.
that's all?
We could do it as
I
our
say that's
next
all.
special town meeting in January.
Something to talk about. Okay, number 4.
Yeah, moving on. I think we would have better dialogue and communication, coordination we need to have an active liaison to the finance committee from the select board. I don't know how the select board relates to other committees in terms of the liaison, but I think for the finance committee, it's crucial, you know, the only way we have a conversation is if we come to one of these meetings.
I think what,
You know,
one of the issues is,
and ask for, pardon?
one of the issues is the meetings line up. That was the issue we always had. You're meeting on the same day and the same time.
But it's not at the same time.
Well, it used to be always at the same day and same time.
But could you, when we get in the budgetary season, couldn't you, if you're having the meetings the same nights we are, start your meeting here, you give 5-10 minutes, hey, what's up, and then you adjourn your meeting to another room to finish what you have to finish. That way, we're always talking when you're meeting. If you're meeting the same night we are, why not we start our meetings together for 10 minutes, especially starting in December, moving forward through the budgetary season. What are the highlights, and then you guys can adjourn and move to a different room. Would that work for you guys?
I don't know.
I guess my own opinion is being the liaison to the school committee and trying to be at every single meeting that I can, and the liaison to the PQB and the master plan committee. I feel like if you're going to be on this board and you have a commitment to another committee, then you need to be at that other meeting. And if you can't, then you need to talk to that other board to figure out what time will work for you and everybody else. I don't feel like meeting for 10 minutes in front of all of us is fair to them, because if you're going to be liaison to that committee, then you need to give them 110% of your time. It's not fair for them to try and do their job with 10 minutes of your time once a week.
It keeps the whole board informed.
The purpose of being a liaison is to give the information back to the board.
But that's not even on our agenda, so
It is. Select board liaison reports.
So, yeah, for the 2.5 years I've been on the finance committee, we never had meetings on company meetings.
Well, actually, Liz
I mean,
and
okay, I
Ed
think.
tried to do it, but because the meetings were in,
So I think the point of number 4 is that we need to really evaluate who are you the liaison to, and if it is the finance committee or the school committee or whatever board it is, if you can't meet the requirement, you need to come to us and let's figure it out. If you can't meet the requirement, you need to go to that board and see if you can work it out. But part of being up here is not one night a week. It's a very big commitment. And I think all of us, including myself, need to really evaluate where we're at with that, because it's not fair, especially to the finance committee.
so when do you guys meet now? Finance?
We've been meeting almost every week on Tuesdays, and it's varied in time based on everybody's schedule. So if, someone has somewhere we need to be and we have to have a quorum, sometimes we meet earlier, but we adjust the time based on making sure we have enough people there. But it is Tuesdays.
Do you let,
Usually around 5:30.
Oh,
I don't
yes.
know when it is.
Yeah,
They
they're
have
on the
posted.
post, she posted, yeah, it's always posted. And it's
Law.
usually posted you do it the Thursday before.
Yeah,
It's not like,
48 hours
so,
before.
yeah, either Wednesday or Thursday before it's posted.
Can you put me on your email list then?
But you have to go to
It's
the
posted now.
government site, my town
Right,
government site,
and I've
and
set
sign up for an alert.
And it'll alert you when we're meeting.
You guys don't email yourself back and forth?
No,
No, we
this is the
signed
new,
up,
this is the new
system.
system.
Trying to be respectful
Where is
of the new system.
Where's it, mytowngovernment.org?
Really?
Okay.
1073.
So we're gonna move on to 5, and that's the commitment from the select board to begin the budget process earlier.
One thing that Linda commented on, last year we put out a schedule, and we need to do the same in all subsequent years. So having a schedule that begins early in the budget planning process, so we finish up on time, or not the night before the warrant has to be signed, or the night that the warrant has to be signed, because I think that's caused lots of issues in the past. The finance committee would like to have, exchanges with the school business manager who's quarterly. We're looking at the major department, and we just need to have a good understanding of the handle on the finances in the hope that, there could be some savings realized. I don't know that, but I think the more we know, I think the more support we can lend to those larger departments. Repeating what was said in the DLS is that we support the creation of a finance team that will be led by the town administrator and include the treasurer, accountant, and adding to that regional school business manager, assistant assessor, and the chair of the finance committee.
Has that been started at all? Have been any kind of meetings with that kind of group yet? No.
I have my first meeting with Bobby and or Cindy next Tuesday, So once I start with them, I've already talked to them about engaging with the finance team concept, and they are on board with it. I think it would be more like a bi-weekly thing, would be probably the most they can commit to on a regular basis for budget season times.
Who's Bobby?
Bobby is the business school manager, Cindy is the former but current business school manager as well.
And then that team needs to report into the, or not to report into, but report to the finance
We
committee.
should meet. Okay. We're recommending that there be quarterly meetings between the finance committee and the heads of major departments, and I think Heather's trying to facilitate that by inviting the chair of the finance committee to the department head meetings that she has once a month. So that's the beginning. I've not attended them, Linda and Amanda have, and as long as we have representation, we share the information between ourselves. We're okay with that. We're looking for more transparency when presenting warrants to the finance committee for special town meetings, and especially for the annual budget at town meeting. The taxpayers should receive detailed information on revenue as well as expenditures. We should have lists of contractors, consultants, and the corresponding contract amount should also be, I'm not saying published, but available to town residents if they choose to pursue that. We're looking for disclosure of business interests with the town of Southampton that should be made public by all elected and appointed individuals, whether they're paid or volunteer. The same disclosure should be applied to familial relationships with town officials and employees for individuals seeking contractual and consulting services as well as employment.
Before you stop, I mean, there's a mass general law that covers that. Are you saying
Right.
people aren't abiding by
But
it?
I'm not sure how transparent it is to people if, you know, it's, and I'm gonna say this because we've only been here for 6 years, so we don't have the history of being raised in this community and understanding how it works and who knows who and who's related to who and how it all. And I'm just saying, you know, an election comes up and, you know, their name's on a ballot. We don't know anything about anybody.
Well,
And
that's
so
why
we're
we have,
asking.
that's why we have the candidates night.
You've had that for the first, well.
We're gonna have
first
that
time
again this
in-
year.
in the- was last year.
We're gonna try to have it every year from now on, so that you guys can
Which is a
meet.
great
And
idea.
on short notice this last.
And we'll have the date out this
But
time.
you have.
But that wouldn't necessarily,
Okay, we're also
Do that.
recommending,
I say that wouldn't necessarily help you unless somebody volunteered that I'm the husband or wife of.
but I think there has to be a disclosure. I don't mean just in that candidates meeting form. I'm talking about just if, you know, I'm especially talking about consultants and
That's
subcontractors.
an ethics violation, so
Okay.
you should bring that to the board if you hear about that.
People who do business with the town, and I'm not just talking about residents of Southampton, I'm talking about outside the town as well. But, we're recommending that, at least 3 bids should be solicited for all existing and new contracts, and I guess major contracts, we need to put a dollar amount in there. Consultation, legal and accounting services, all multi-year contracts should be rebid every 3 years instead of just renewing, and I don't know if you don't do that, but if you don't, it's a recommendation to
The
us.
major three ones are dispatch, police, and highway, and they're up for negotiation this year.
Yeah, I don't think she's.
I think
talking
she
about
means
those.
services.
So those are the big ones, those are the.
Yeah,
I think
no,
she
but
means
I'm
services.
not,
They're talking about union
I'm not
contracts.
talking about the employee contracts, I'm
Okay.
talking about
Services.
the contracts
Services.
for.
Like for
special
auditing, for
services
instance,
company.
when the auditors come here, Lansing.
But
Okay.
that's,
The auditors, yeah,
that's clearly defined under 30B, chapter 30B, and how we do it. There's a law that tells you how to do all that.
Is, I think the finance committee's alluding to a more restrictive measure than even what 30B requires, so. That's my understanding, Francine, if I'm not mistaken.
okay, and then we would like to be, as the meetings, that the finance committee at least have a representative attend the meetings with the auditors when they come in to, you know, go over the draft of their audit report and their management letter. We have no conversation, no dialogue, and certainly no responsibility either to us or anyone else that we can see to put into correction, you know, the corrective action plan. I wanted to put it into place based on the.
But can you look at the annual budget and see what's gonna be paid out for an audit? Because it's hard, I mean, the assessors, we're gonna have an audit this year. It's every 3 years, so part of the budget is like $5,000 a year for the $15,000 cost of it. So there should be a way of looking at the budget to see who's gonna be audited. shouldn't it?
But then we need to be invited to the
Meeting,
meeting.
I'm
So
talking
then,
about-
well, I think it's, well, I think it's gonna come down, sorry, it's gonna come down to finance and say, hey, it looks like you're gonna have an audit this year. I wanna be there. I think it's gonna come down to, 'cause I don't think it's gonna come the other way. To be realistic, I don't think it's gonna come around the other way.
I don't think the auditor should invite us, I think.
No, I mean
Right.
the board or the commission, I don't know if it,
Make
I
us
mean-
aware.
you know, it's, that kind of communication is difficult to do, but a lot of times you have to kind of look to something and then go after it, then wait for someone to tell you.
Well,
I think that it's definitely a conversation and not unreasonable to think that the finance committee should be invited. So knowing that
No,
these
it's a
recommendations
good
are
idea.
made, then,
I'm gonna disagree with Dave. I think now that we have a good town administrator, that's the person that will let you know what's going on, because that's the contact person. In the past, we haven't had that,
But it can't be it can't be individual based, it has to be the sort of,
but Heather's a point person for all this stuff, I think, and she's the one that reaches out to these other committees and all that. I mean, she's gonna be part of the budget process, which is great. I mean, we've got a point person, I think, that's very capable. Let's use her. I mean, that's my thought.
And then finally, I guess.
when you're adding a number.
It wasn't on this list, but finally for myself, I mean, I've had the same experience twice, you know, having gone through two budget cycles for the town. And it's just my opinion, if we don't implement, if we keep doing things the same way, we're gonna end up in the same place.
which things do we keep doing the same way? What do you
The
say?
whole process, there's really, as far as I know, you know, the way we're talking about the, well, let me give you some very specific examples.
Thank you.
Okay? I can remember sitting at meetings and getting, you know, requests to transfer money from one account to another, or from the reserve fund, or, you know, or, yeah, those would be the two places. And the money had already been spent 2 months ago. So I'm sitting there saying, well, why am I on the finance committee? If the bill wasn't paid, they come to us to pay the bill, but the commitment was already made.
By the
You-
department
we-
heads, by the department.
By the department, yeah. And I'm not,
That's more of a cultural change then.
well,
Well, it's a policy change. If you want to transfer money from one to another, then you need to go to the finance committee to ask for a transfer to see if there's money before you spend it.
Right, but that's,
and the other part,
That's
there's no sign off on these by the accountant that says to us that in fact, there is money in there to pay the bill.
But I
I
think,
mean, we make that assumption, but we don't know it for a fact. We get the expense reports every 15 days. But in those intervening 15 days, something else may have hit the books or not hit the books yet, and you could have overspent.
So
And
what,
So shouldn't that transfer then go to
We
Vicky?
wrote procedures when I first got here, and those people were supposed to go to the finance committee prior to spending that money and getting the transfer.
And so that's never happened.
And no, I shouldn't say it never happened, it happened less frequently where people would go to them and say, hey, I already spent this money for whatever, I need to transfer because I'm gonna be overspent.
I think it's in the bylaws of the town.
so you need a bigger stick then, so what you have to be able to say to them is that you've already spent the money, but we don't necessarily have to approve it, you're gonna have to take it out of your budget.
We did do several rounds of that a year or so ago, with, circulating the same requests around and saying no. But the point is, we ultimately had to agree to it because it was a commitment that was already made. What were we gonna do?
And
We need to review
above
the
and beyond
system
what your normal
and figure out when that works.
Well, what else you can do is to say, look, you can't get it from here, you're gonna have to take it out of your budget.
but Dave, they didn't have, any finance committee didn't have any teeth. This is the
Right.
teeth right
I'm
here.
just saying, this is the stick, this is the stick on the other
It's in
side
the
of this.
bylaws,
Well,
Right.
and those are.
So I would like to say thank you for those recommendations. I think that I'm hopeful that all of us are going to act on them and do the right thing for the town, because I don't disagree with any of them. I think that those are all the first steps in moving in the right direction towards a budget process that's going to work. Would anyone else like to comment on those before we move forward?
Are we gonna discuss the budget process?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And one other thing about, I know we said we didn't raise that, but the DLS report was very clear that the finance committee did, an unbalanced budget, last minute things. I mean, it sounded like a lot of the issues for the town weren't just on the front page of the Gazette, but it was clearly laid out that the finger pointing was at a committee that, again, of volunteers and, and we don't work in a vacuum, so.
I want to just reiterate something. I I get how hard it is to volunteer, obviously, and I don't blame the finance committee, regardless of this report. There was a change in structure of how things occurred. Finance, then the town administrator, Diana took over, then there was a vacuum when she left, and it wasn't a vacuum, so I don't know what they were looking at. If they were looking at when Diane Schindler was the town administrator, and it was run a little differently. I mean, it was just a change as we went through. My hope is with a town administrator that's gonna be here for the next 15 years, is that the budgetary process will then smooth out and not be such, chaos.
Well, I think one of the issues is that balanced budgets were presented the last several years, but they didn't get past this board right here. Well, we can't do that, we can't cut that. They didn't want anything to happen. They were balanced budgets, so there's no issue about that. It's just, do you wanna make it painful or not? And this board said, no, we don't
We
want to
always
do that.
have, by law, we have to have a balanced budget at the annual town meeting, correct?
You can spend free cash till it's none of
That's
it's
Michael Phelan's rule. Rule number 1 was not to use the free cash.
But that rule didn't work.
That rule we tried to stick to every year.
No, we didn't.
The
No.
problem,
We didn't.
the problem is this, though, is,
Since 2006.
What's that?
We spent $2 million in free cash to
That
that.
was
but the problem has always been that we tell the budget, we tell the department heads, look, we're gonna level fund or 5% cut this year.
Yeah.
And so they make up a budget, which is hogwash. Because it takes money to run a department, so they'll level fund it, or they'll give a 5% cut. 6 months later, the reality of a real budget starts rearing its head, and that's where cash gets
Well,
spent.
that's where the Board of Selectmen should step in and say,
Print
you
money.
can't do that anymore, so show me where you're making the cuts, because you're going to go over and we're not going to pay for it. So you show me who you're cutting, because chances are that's when it's gonna happen.
You have to lay 2 people off to save enough
Okay,
money.
then that's what you have to do, but that's what hasn't been
I
done
don't
in
wanna
the
lay off any more
past.
cops, I don't wanna lay off any more.
Hey, if you don't lay
Alright,
them
so
off,
let's move forward now. We're gonna review the current
We're getting
fiscal
money.
15 budget. Sharon?
I'm sorry, my name is Sharon Powell-Wojcik, and I just have a question. We're trying to get more involved and engaged, and this is our first meeting, so we don't know what the process is, so please excuse us, so I need clarification.
Sure.
Can audience members raise their hand and ask questions, or does that not happen?
So generally, the meeting is our meeting, and we like to run it the way, try and get through as much information as we can. If there becomes a heated topic, I don't think been known to not answer raised hands. But I can say going forward, probably if things start to get a little out of control, we might pull it back in. So if there's questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you want to raise your hand and ask a question, I probably won't ignore you.
Okay, well, no, we just didn't know, we just.
You are welcome to raise your hand. Some of this stuff that
Do we not?
you are welcome to,
Ask a question.
you're welcome to ask questions, but if you could raise your hand and let us know who you are and where you're from, so, other people know who you are.
But why did you come here tonight?
Because she wants to get more involved.
I want to get more involved and engaged. I've been attending Hampshire Regional School Committee meetings, which have been concerning me. I've been attending Norris School Committee meetings. I'm on the agenda. So I figure if I'm on the agenda, I probably should be here.
She is. She is.
So, and, we're just,
I'm happy to see parent faces in the audience. I think if you ask any of them, if I'm at a meeting, I always plug the Board of Selectmen meetings, and I'm happy to see that people are finally coming. So, if you raise your hand, chances are you'll be acknowledged.
So you have a question at this time?
I do not have a question. My question was, how does the
How do I
process
ask a
work?
question?
I
Just
need
like that.
clarification.
Just like that. So we're gonna talk about the current fiscal 15 budget. For any of you out there that have a packet, we're on page 2 and it says fiscal 15 current balance issues. If you don't have one, there are some up here. I'm happy to pass them out. Did you get one, Vicki?
Vicky's most important, everyone else.
No?
What you see in front of you is a line item, budget line items of departments or lines that are over at this point 34% spent, because at this point in the budget, you should be at or about 34%. So these departments or committees are over 34%. We do have an explanation, either myself or Heather or Vicky, probably even Donna, of all of these. So if there are any that the board would like to discuss at this point or have questions about, I would accept them now.
Can I just review it all?
You want to do the whole thing?
I just want to go through it really quick because people at home don't have this paper in front of them.
I thought there's a lot of these that are below budget, 34% or below, shouldn't even be on.
34% or
Below.
above,
Shouldn't-
sorry.
Right, but there's a lot of these that are 34 and below sitting right here.
There's a few, yes, but I just want to touch on real
Why
quick.
are they there?
So, the first item you see is, first of all, Dawn and Vicky and myself went over these this morning to review what we had, and I apologize if I don't have percentages on all of them. Sometimes Excel and I had a fight and I lost. The balances you see listed are what we believe remains in there as of October 30th. There are 2 typos on there, which I'll get to, at least that I know of, that Liz and I went over earlier that we came across. But so the first thing is selectmen expenses. We currently have a balance of $693. We've already spent through 65%. Most of that's due to annual dues we pay out of that. We pay the MMA, MMPA, STAM, and we also pay for advertisements for any jobs and the like out of that. And also for the tax hearing last week is another example of an advertisement we pay out of that expense line. Web page maintenance, we actually added funds to it, which have not been added in yet, but that was an additional $1,000.
Yeah, it's in there.
Oh, it wasn't October 30th. On the October 30th printout, it wasn't.
Or it would have been dated, whatever the 10/21.
So,
Page-
on page 2.
Page 2, the top says fiscal 15 current
So it's
balance
this one.
issues.
I apologize, we're out of staples. No. Yeah. Nope.
This one here?
Nope. So anyway, the website page maintenance one, we're all set with that one. We're back on track, and we should still come out underneath what we had. Photocopy, lease and supplies, there was 2 monitors we ended up purchasing that actually ended up coming out of that account, which we've since fixed, so that account number is now correct. And the amount is correct, and we're all on track on that. Postage, I checked in with Donna earlier. Donna, is Donna here?
She just
Oh, she
walked
stepped
out.
out. We're all set with that for at least the time being. If cost of stamps go up, I don't know if we'll still be on track. Finance committee expenses, I had written training occurred here, but essentially, I was corrected this morning. I didn't correct it on this, I apologize. But you did, and that was very noble of you all. That was $50 per individual that your finance committee members donated to their higher education to the finance committee. Plus mileage. But for finance committee expenses, essentially they have a annual fee of, I think it's approximately 100, Vicky, do you remember, 168?
$176.
Annually, so they could be members of the finance, I'd like to call it finance committee anonymous, but
It's like the MMA, the Mass Municipal Association, it's the Finance Committee Association, basically.
thank you. Then you have accounting software and assessor software. Those are one-time expenses. They pay up front at the beginning of the year. Legal expenses, we're actually on track with this. The original number you might have reflected on last week looked off because there was a purchase order in play. We're only on 18% of this. Will this be underway the rest of the year? It depends is really the answer, which it just happens to be in the legal department section. The reason that is, we have a couple legal cases right now in court. We have another one that could go to court anytime. And we also have 2 public request issues that are currently being covered, or at least we're hoping are covered under insurance. If they stay that way, we're good. If they change and the insurance carrier says we're not covering them, then they'll be bought back over here, and the cost will go up. Town clerk expenses, there were a bunch of trainings and supplies involved in the amount up front. That's why it's a little bit higher than you'd expect spent. Election registration expenses, we've had a special election in July. That caused a throw off of that. Com's right on par. Talked to Charlie this morning.
Can you slow down for a minute? When we had talked about the election registration expenses,
Yes.
Chances are this, I just want people to be aware of the ones that might run over.
Yes.
And so
This
this
is likely to
line
run
item
over.
is likely to run over probably, what did we say, about $500
About $500 on
at
average.
the end of the year that we're gonna need to find. Vicki?
Vicki Moore, town accountant. Basically, Janine came to me at the beginning of the fiscal year when we had the special town election. She's already written up, she already wrote up, budget transfer request because it wasn't something that was in her original budget. Excuse me. I believe she did come to the finance committee, and what has been past practice has been, you need to spend your budget down before they will actually transfer those funds.
But
So
she's already done the process and gone to you and said, I'm going to need this money before she spends
At
it.
this point in time now to say, this is how much money she needs, and I have that information, but, so we shouldn't go over it all.
So Heather, just to clarify, we're gonna be 2 quarters in, so we should be around 60%, 50%?
No, we should be closer to 33%.
We're 1/3 in.
1/3.
All right, so PVPC and Barnes Aquifer, the balance in each of those is approximately 0 on both. They're just flat annual fees. I think there's a couple pennies left in PVPC. Gas and electric, town hall, and the Larrabee building were both okay in both of those so far. We have a purchase order in play in both of those, so the numbers looked a little skewed on previous reports.
I was gonna stop you, because as of the 10:30 report, they were way over budget.
Nope, they're perfectly fine. If you have to look over one more number to what's actually been spent.
Right, but the expense was, well, it was in the 65%.
Because there's purchase orders on both of them that I had put in. So the purchase orders are making it look like it's higher than what it
So the
actually is.
purchase order encumbers the funds.
Correct.
So if they encumber the fund, are you encumbering funds for a period going forward?
Yes, so I did a blanket purchase order for both of them, so I wouldn't have to keep going back for purchase orders.
So that skews the reports. Is there a way that we can correct those? So that when we see it, they're...
We have to work with software and see what they can come up with.
Yeah, 'cause
This
they-
is, they wrote this report for us, the way that it is, when they first went on to self-rate. I don't know that there's actually another room for another column, to have an encumbered column and a spent column, but it's still gonna reflect the balance as it stands here.
Right, but it skews it, because when we looked at it last week and discussed it, it was at 65%, which is double what it should be.
Because it's telling you, like, it's telling you it's encumbering those funds and this is what you spent, so it looks like it's
Yeah.
60%.
Well,
You've
anytime
already
you-
accounted for those funds.
Scary.
So whether you actually list it on there or not, it's still gonna.
But it should be a
make it seem-
footnote on the report saying encumbered through, because this doesn't encumber through the full fiscal year, because that's not enough money to encumber.
But if you look at the actual expended is only 3,005 and 4,008, which is a lot less than what it says over here is balance. It's showing you a $6,000 balance for each of them, but you're
Right.
starting out with 20 grand.
Right,
So
So
let-
you do the difference. And that's what you
Perhaps
have.
they can fix the report. If not, we need to pay a little.
I guess, what would you want it to read?
well, again, if we know that, if it's showing a percentage expended of 65%, let's say, on average of these two, that's not accurate, and that's what brought it up to the top of the pile. Like, wait a minute, we should be at
Because
33.
there's a purchase order in there for whatever, 10 grand or 9 grand or whatever that might be.
Yeah, but so a footnote or something in there letting us know why it's over the,
Maybe a little star.
yeah. Or only put in actual, don't put what's expended. Why go on the purchase order, why don't you go on actual paid?
What if we compromise and I just do one of these joint reports with Vicki and Donna every 3 months?
I'm not getting that. Why don't we just put there, because it says actually expended.
Yeah.
Doesn't say actually encumbered. Encumbered means you're just holding it over here for use later on. That's not what this report is. This is an expense report to a certain date.
Right.
Correct.
Take
So
it
why don't we just
literally.
put what we spent, like it says?
Because the purchase order system feeds into this. I don't know if they can take it out of there.
Yeah, we should correct it, because this is wrong information.
So let's see if we can get some more information about that.
How much more of these are encumbered versus actual spent? I don't know.
So then you have town hall building expenses, they're at 37% right now just because of annual maintenance. Larrabee building expense, we took care of that at the special town meeting. Technology equipment, we had to buy antivirus software and the brand new firewall this year, so that put us a little bit behind where we normally would be. Technology services, we had an IT company come in, we actually had a lot of Trojan horses and other issues on the computers due to our antivirus not working properly and our firewall being down. That's now resolved, so that should slow down the spending in that category. Police equipment maintenance, I spoke with the police chief via email. He assured me that, you know, it's typical for them to spend up more of the money at the beginning of the year in this category. It's par for the course. Regional lockup assessment, it's a flat annual fee. Building inspection expenses, this is something I've been talking about the past couple meetings. Essentially what happened here was we had alternate building commissioners taking over until Tom Quinlan could step in. And when we did so, we were unable to pay them out of the building commissioner wage line because they were independent contractors, and we had to actually pay them out of what we have for an expense line, which becomes the building inspection expense. So we had reserved the money from the building commissioner wage line, but we couldn't spend it. We had to spend it out of this line, therefore putting this line negative, having to borrow money from the reserve fund in order to replenish this line so we could continue paying these folks. In the meantime, we'll go to special town meeting in January, put the money where it needs to be, taking it out of the building commissioner wage line, transferring it over to the expenses to replenish what we took out of it, and then putting the money back into the reserves. So essentially, if you think of it, if we took $5 out of the expense line to pay folks, we're gonna put $5 back in it from the building commissioner lines just to transfer, not taking extra money from anywhere. We're gonna take another $5 from the building commissioner's line and put it in the reserves from what we had originally taken out to put it back in.
That's if it gets approved at the special town meeting.
It should get approved. I don't see why it wouldn't get approved. We're not asking for additional money. We're just asking to put the money where it needs to be in the first place and where we intended for it to come from. And we're spending within the means. We just need to adjust it so we can actually do so. General highway wages. Randall only actually gets, has enough funds really to pay his guys for about 17 weeks out of the year. So money looks a little funny sometimes when it comes from one account or another. He'll be switching over to winter roads wages and the
Can you
like.
time out for a minute? Just for
Sure.
anybody in the audience who doesn't understand what that means, the highway department gets different sources of funding. So they get funding for 17 weeks from us, and then when it starts to snow and there's winter roads, then they get money from that account. Maybe I'm telling you all things you already know, but, so if you see that line item is very high, it's gonna start snowing soon, and then he'll start using money from a different account to pay his folks. And then when it stops snowing, they go back and forth. So there's a couple of accounts that the highway department uses for their funding. Go ahead, keep going.
The road machinery expenses, that is actually, this is another one of those ones I think, John, you were probably frustrated with last week. The actual expended amount's only 24,000 out of the original 74,000, but it's showing that the balance is only 39,000. There are some amounts of money in there encumbered. The balance is actually higher, so he's only about a third of the way through that.
If we can put actuals in
Yep.
there.
We'll see what we can do. On Board of Health expenses, they they did training and supplies up front. Library expenses, Barbara, I imagine you guys are right on, where you're like 3% higher than, but I imagine that's fine. I think I saw you bought audio tapes, books on tape.
Yeah, after we send out money for the books from the town, I have to take it from the gift fund. So
Okay,
it's always a little.
so you spend our money first. Just checking.
We're trying to raise the other.
Park commission wages, there was a little issue in that. We ended up going over. Vicki, did you want to add anything on that one?
It got charged to park for mowing the fields, but we, have moved it to a different account, so back to highway, I believe. So,
That's where the DPW comes in versus the highway department.
The next line item is the unemployment compensation. How this one works, for those who don't realize, is we try to take a guesstimate at the beginning of the year as to how many claims we're gonna get for unemployment, and we also look at the average of the prior years, and we try to take into account what the current year has before us. And when we did so, we budgeted $8,000, because on average, that's what we've been spending, is $8,000, and everything was going just peachy keen. What ended up happening is we lost a case through the school department, and when we did so, we ended up having to do back pay. So the initial hit you see right here, that's a negative $8,502 at our current balances, it's due to the back pay. This isn't gonna be the end of it. We still, if someone goes on unemployment, it's half a year. So we have to keep paying for half a year. So if we already paid, a certain amount, we still have, we're probably gonna see this line go down to negative $46,000, give or take.
And the highway workers that are being furloughed, from
We can have a discussion later, David. So on insurance,
that's just,
they're actually not on furlough days right now.
okay.
They're all back on working. Insurance for general, we are actually, you don't see a number there, it's negative 5,000. We had a couple things go up, and we had a bill that just came to my attention last week that we got forwarded from the insurance agent that apparently we didn't receive in the mail. We didn't receive the second late notice or the first one. But we took care of it. We were able to take care of that, and the amount went up slightly from last year. And we also got, Vicki, we got a assessment from Mega this year that said we owed them more money at the beginning.
2000, it was like $300 and some change. We didn't budget enough in this account to begin with, and then the rates went up, so that's why we're over that $5,000.
So, given this conversation, at this point, and Vicki and Heather can correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to need to find about $70,000 so far at the end of the year. That's not
70?
$770, yeah, $70,000.
Did you come to that by extrapolating where we are here going to the end of the year? Because it didn't look this bad.
Most of that $70,000, I'm telling you, is based on the unemployment that's not paid out yet, and we didn't budget for. So we need to figure out where that money is going to come from, and now is as good a time as any to figure that out, I guess. Really, you have three choices. You can take it from your free cash, your operating stabilization, or you can cut.
I submitted it to be certified.
How much?
We're talking $350,000 to $400,000.
But we can't use that free cash for this problem, right?
You can,
After it's certified.
once it's certified and you vote for it at a town meeting, correct?
This is the typical select board dilemma, is you have $350,000 in free cash, a $70,000 bill. Do you cut the budgets? Or do you spend $70,000 out of $350,000?
How much is an operational stabilization?
Not much.
$90,000 total.
No, here you
No.
go.
That's reserve 9,000, I think, but.
There's $82,500 in operating stabilization currently.
How about capital?
Capital, $70,101.
Okay, so 70,000 is a cruiser and a half for capital, so, or a truck for the fire department. So we have no extra in the capital, obviously, even in operational stabilization, we don't either. So I think we should look at planning on that money, most of that money going to the stabilizations.
Where do you want to come up with this $70,000
I
at
think
the
we
end
need
of
to
the
look
year?
at the budgets we have now and say, okay, how much will it take to decrease the budgets? And
You actually would take a budget cut over the $70,000?
instead of using all the free cash like we've been doing,
Well,
absolutely,
all the free cash would be $350,000.
for the first time out.
Right, Vicki?
So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I thought Donna was still here, our student enrollment for Smith Vocational is less than originally budgeted for.
By
It's
how
like
much?
There's only 36 kids versus 44 kids. Donna has it, she
It's
figured
like
it out.
six,
She
it's
got it.
instead of
Six
800,000,
different.
it's six
It's,
something.
6 kids different.
yeah,
But the total is 600,000, 600 something thousand instead of 800,000.
800,000. So you have money there to transfer at the end of the year.
Is that in the Hampshire
Sort of.
regional budget?
No, that is Smith Vocational.
Well,
Okay, so we
Now,
can get our hands on
We
it?
can get our hands on that. The Hampshire regional budget and the Norris school budget, we cannot touch because the school committee has the ultimate final say in what that budget's used for.
We
So
can
we
cut
can't
the-
go and transfer
So,
funds from there.
The only,
But vocation we can.
the only problem we may run into with that, or run into in the first place, I'm meeting with Cindy next week, Cindy and Bobby, who are the school business managers. We're gonna go over net school spending, which apparently is a favorite topic of everyone who works for the state, because they always refer me to someone else. It is something I've been struggling with to understand. I've been asking lots of people. I'm getting pieces of it, glimpses of it here and there, but I decided it would be best if I just sat down with them. The concern that they keep bringing up to me, I can neither confirm nor deny this at this time, is that we are very much on the threshold of meeting our net school spending requirements for FY15. That being the case, we may need to look into, if we are under that, can we transfer money come January at a special town meeting into one of the accounts so that we meet it? Because one of the concerns they have brought up, and I don't know if this is actually applicable or not because there's different interpretations of this, they kept saying if the Smith vocational numbers come in lower than what they're expected to be, it's going to hurt your net school spending. Does it actually hurt it? I don't know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But the problem is, if it does, we may still have to put that money somewhere.
When do you find out that answer?
Tuesday.
So we have to give them money just to kick the
Here's the
budget?
problem, if you underspend in net school spending, they can assess us a fine from the state, and then we additionally have to pay more money next year on top of that.
Right, no, I understand, but if we had to give them $150,000 to meet net school spending, that's just on top of the budget, just because we have to. That doesn't make sense either. Yeah, I mean, there's gotta be a better plan to utilize it better. I mean, we don't wanna just give the schools X amount of dollars and say, use it because you have to.
Well,
Well-
there's other ways around it, there's Schedule 19s, we can get more into detail and see what they currently have drawn up for that. Schedule 19 is essentially, I like to call it in-kind services from the town. Essentially, they're writing off the cost of the services from the highway department, the treasurer, the accountant, whatever services the town workers are providing for the school. If they're plowing the roads over there, if they're plowing the parking lot, if they're sanding the parking lot, if they're providing loom, any of that stuff.
So I would like to wait and see if we meet net school spending or not on Tuesday before we decide what to do with that money and how much less there is or more there is or whatever that is. Erin? Hi.
Erin Creature, 49 Coleman Road. I guess my one concern when you're saying about the free cash is that it was many times referred to in this report that we just jump to free cash all the time. And I, as a concerned citizen, I'm kind of sick of seeing that. I think we need to really take a hard look and say, where do we need to cut? Also, one other thing is everybody that I hear around me, and I'm new to Southampton, is, well, they always find the money. We don't need a Prop 2.5, they always find the money. And I think we need to show we can't always find the money, and we have to really think about that hard.
Where would you cut 70,000 from the budget?
Well, I need to look hard at the budget, but I think that we need to see some of those cuts. I mean, I don't want to see not enough police around, but you know what? Maybe it has to happen, because people aren't feeling it. People are saying, oh, I've been in Southampton for 20 years, and they always find the money somehow. And we need to feel it. I don't want to feel it, I'm a resident, but if that's what it's going to take for people to understand, I'll do it for an interim. I mean, I just think it doesn't hurt enough people right now.
The only problem I have is that the people I worry about getting hurt are the people they're at least able to take care of themselves. I mean, that's a definition of society, being able to take care of those people. That's the elderly and the kids. When we make budget cuts like this, when we're talking about EMS, and we're talking about this stuff, we're talking about putting those people in harm's way.
Agreed, but we also just said that.
And I get all that. I've been putting forth for after-school bus to keep the kids engaged until the parents come home. 70,000 is a lot of money. And I don't, knowing the budget as well as I know it, I don't know where you're gonna cut 70,000, to be honest with you. And this is where free cash gets spent, is because you come along and you stumble upon a bill that comes upon you, and you've already level funded, or you've already, decreasing. Gas prices thankfully have gone down, but in the past they've gone up. But you have to level fund, which means if you're taking money out of your fuel costs, you don't have as much money around. Where are you gonna take the 70,000 from?
I mean, that's really what free cash is supposed to be used for. It's not supposed to say, hey, let's take 315 balanced budget. so
That's
we
not
can
what
cut
we're
it.
doing.
No, but I'm just saying that's what free cash is supposed to be
But
used for.
I'm just trying to explain to her,
like
that's,
this.
right,
Right.
so I don't know where you would
For this
cut
type
the
of situation.
70,000. It's a bare bones budget, and it's been that way for the past 5 years.
I think to Erin's point, she's just trying to make us aware of her opinion at this point, and
Well, I'm looking for any input, because I'm open to any suggestions.
so.
2 weeks before Halloween in 2010, we were gonna shut the streetlights off to save $20,000. Just to let you know.
John?
I think one of the issues, and Aaron's, kind of barking up the right tree, if you will, we have stabilization funds, $80,000 and $70,000. That's our rainy day fund, and we've almost bankrupt those funds. And if we don't put free cash in there, when it comes time to have an emergency, we crash a police cruiser, we crash a fire truck. There's no money in there. $150,000 in these two funds is pennies. Maybe we don't take the $70,000 from all the budgets, but maybe we say, 40 or 50, we gotta take it from the budgets, because there's gotta be some cuts. I want the streetlights on, I want the policemen, I want the firemen, but we're gonna bankrupt the town if we don't do something. I think that's, pardon?
So after reviewing the
Not yet.
fiscal 15 budget, and we're gonna wait to get the results on net school spending and such until Tuesday,
We have time to discuss stuff like that, because if we're talking about it for a special town meeting in January, the board has time to make decisions.
you say that, but there's only 43 days till Christmas, so just remember.
If we cut the budgets, we don't have to bring it to the town meeting.
If you what?
If
Well,
we cut people's
if-
budgets, we don't need to bring it to a town meeting,
Yes, but you're reappropriating the money to someplace else.
or just to
No,
save
if you're
money.
cutting it from, say you decide that, I'm not worth the money I have, so you decide to cut me 50%.
That never happened, but go ahead.
Yeah, so you're taking 50% of my pay, and now you're putting it towards this bill. So you're cutting my line item by 50% and moving it to that line item. The town meeting needs to vote on it.
The transfer they have to vote on it?
Yeah,
Even if we're cutting budgets 5% across
yes,
the
yes.
board? Okay.
Whatever you're cutting, please do less rather than more, because it's more.
Well, the issue is though, we've only got 7 months left, so we need to get something going
But
soon.
also keep in mind too, and this is something that's hit the press a couple times at this point. Next year, we get a new governor, and they're already talking that there's going to be cuts to balance the state budget. If there's cuts to that, there could be cuts to what we call our cherry sheet, and the money that comes in, the very little money that comes in.
Stop, I don't wanna hear it.
$325 million.
I'm just saying,
So these are all conversations that we can have at a later date, but given the time frame and the length of the agenda still to go, I'm gonna move forward.
Can I ask you a question first? We can have these conversations later, but later is always later and later. Can we set up a meeting to come up with specific ways to cut these costs rather than say later?
Do you have
Yes,
a
can-
motion to cut the $70,000?
Can we put this on Tuesday night's agenda, and people need to come prepared with where they would like to see $70,000 cut?
Or at least a part of it?
Yes, so if you're coming to this meeting and you're on the Board of Selectmen on Tuesday, you need to have some idea where you would cut $70,000 if that's what we choose to do.
I'll let
I
you know
also
right
say
now.
that we need to publicize it, so the people out in the town, they may have some great ideas that we have no clue on. I mean, I like to
Right
get
now,
that.
I don't see where you can cut it, so I'm not even considering that idea.
Sharon?
Didn't you just, Tammy Lewis, 298 College Highway, didn't you just say that you could save $20,000 if you shut the lights off? Everybody has lights on their house, let them pay for that. Everybody has lights in their cars, let them pay for that.
Shut all the street lights off?
Yeah,
It's already very tough.
you'd be able to see the stars.
That would be lovely.
Yeah.
That would be lovely. So if you could come up with a few, find out how much it would cost to turn the street lights off. And
20,000.
Well, but Chief Silvernail is gonna be in here real quick, like, that's a, it's a safety issue. I personally, I was just walking the dog before I got here, and it's dark as the son of a gun. I said, I wonder how much it would cost me personally to turn that light back on, because, it's dark. So maybe that's what we need to do. If we wanna lighten our street, we can pay for it ourselves.
That's what we do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
we all do, all in my whole neighborhood.
My hometown has one street light, Westhampton,
Yeah.
and there it is, the person pays
Yeah,
for
we
it
pay for our
as
own lights.
in front of their house. One street light in the whole town.
We have lights, every other house we pay for, it's on our own power, our house.
Sharon?
I just had a question. We have 150 roughly in free cash and saved now.
No. Is that what you're saying?
There's two stabilization.
Oh,
Stabilization.
yeah, I mean, capital and.
But one's operational, one's capital, two
Yeah,
different uses.
152.
You're right, so 150 in, and how much are we certifying in free cash for FY14?
350.
Between 350 and 400.
Oh, okay, that's a better number than I.
But just give me,
I
possibly
was
saying,
hearing about
historically,
90,000
in 2000,
Good.
2008 or something like that, we had $670,000 in those.
Hold on, she has a question.
I just wanna let her know where that was.
I think Vicky was trying to say something I thought was really important. We might be seeing some 9C cuts for the FY15 budget, because Mass has a structural deficit. And
$325 million.
yeah, I mean, I think I think he's bringing it to the table, like, we have a $70,000 deficit right now. You asked, hey, what might be an idea? I mean, to be honest with you, my background is in municipal finance. My tax rate would be delays in hiring due to attrition. Would you get to all 70? I don't know. But hiring freezes, usually free cash is used for one-time capital expenditures when you have a big problem. It's frowned upon to use it, best practice, frowned upon using it for operational use, because that's a reoccurring cost that will continue next year with an escalator factor, because now you've got raises. So, I mean, really, I support Aaron, and I agree with the GLS recommendation, which is, you know what? We have free cash. I think it's great that we're gonna have like 500,000 after this certification. But at the end of the day, we might be dealing with 9C cuts. We know that we have a $70,000 structural problem this fiscal year. And 9C cuts, if they cut us $200,000, it might only be $200,000, but over a 6-month period, that's a $400,000 hit. And Heather's right, the revenue to local aid will probably be less for FY16. So we might need free cash then. So we need to be asking about streetlights, we need to be having hiring freezes, we need to be, getting dollars for nutrition. I mean, these are some hard questions, and I think it's a great idea to bring it to the community.
So we can do that. Facebook. Just saying. So I would say that we have talked pretty much about the DLS report and its recommendations heavily, thanks to the finance department. Are there any other thoughts about the DLS report or the recommendations? I personally support all of them. There's not anything on there I think is wrong or that we shouldn't move in that direction of. And I think we should implement them going into the fiscal 16 budget. Well, I see a lot of hands all of a sudden. So before I call on all of those people, is there anybody on the board that would like to add anything new or any other recommendations? Vicki.
I guess Heather and Donna and I had a discussion this morning, being the treasurer, accountant, and town administrator. And I guess, my opinion would be, I think we need to keep the finance committee included and involved. And it might not necessarily be where, the three of us would sit with your entire board when the historical commission came in. But when you're talking fire, highway, and police, the bigger departments, you guys should all be involved, included with the three of us on that finance team, so that you kind of know what's going on. And how can you do those budget transfers for people if you really don't know what's in their budgets to begin with? You're just going to be rubber stamping that. So I think that it's important that, you are elected by the people out there to say, hey, we want you to represent us when it comes time to that particular budget. So I think they should definitely be, included in that
I agree. The bigger
process.
department is probably the most important place to focus the energy, maybe not so much on the small budgets. Okay. Erin, did you have a question?
Well, so I'm a little bit newbie on this tax stuff, but a big thing that jumped out to me in the report had to do with the tax levy and the fact we left $95,000 on the table. And up with that comes the question of, how come we haven't looked at a whole town-wide reeval of the taxes to capture new growth? So that's one big thing that I've been talking about and running through is why is that not on the table as a way to fix some of the problems we have?
We had that discussion last week with the assessors.
Can I tell you what happened?
Vicki, go ahead.
Okay, so back last May when we were going to balance the budget, it was suggested we took $371,777 from free cash to balance the budget. Somehow that article was left off the annual town meeting warrant. So we passed an unbalanced budget back in May because it wasn't on the warrant. I had to wait to certify free cash in order to put it on another town meeting warrant to appropriate that money from free cash to balance the budget. In the meantime, I was doing the tax rate. I went through all my initial miscellaneous revenues to do the tax rate, and the DOR, this is the second time I've ever done it, I had to teach it to myself because no one was here teaching. And they suggested I use a 3-year average for those miscellaneous receipts to make up some of that revenue piece. So I did that, waited for the 371 to pass, plugged that in, and it was December 18th, so we had to get it done so that Donna and her crew could put it in their software system and print all those bills and mail out by December 31st. Partly was my fault. I didn't notice it when I submitted it to them. They never mentioned it when I submitted it. They let it go. But again, using that free cash to balance the budget and not doing it doing it in the same fiscal year kind of messed everything up. So that's
We're
where that
talking
comes
about
from.
reassessing.
But that doesn't answer.
But I guess if I had not put in, if we had used that money, we put the free cash in, then what would have happened was I would have put in less miscellaneous receipts, dollar-wise, and that money would have gotten dumped into our free cash because we would have collected that much more. So in the budget, I would have put in $710,000, for instance, to do the tax recap for the motor vehicle. Instead, I put in 745 because that was the 3-year average. So by putting the 745 in the budget and we collected 750, I only had $5,000 in free cash. Where if I had put in 710,
I think the question she had was, was not, that's important
Well, but that's
information.
why there was that money left on the table.
But what she's asking about is the reevaluation of the homes.
But that's just gonna disperse it differently amongst everybody. We can only tax people that same amount.
No. New growth is outside of the levy, and we are not under a ceiling.
But new
So
growth,
you can capture the, like, right now, we are way under assessed. If we did a full town-wide assessment, and then did 1/3 of the town every year for 3 years, and
I
kept
got
doing
into
that.
an argument with Mr. Swanson last week.
I don't know who that is, I'm sorry.
He's on the assessment.
Okay,
is
well,
that new,
what?
is that new growth, or is that just reassessing at higher values, and we have to lower the mill rate? I mean, the new growth is just the new growth in town, it's not the new growth we get from reassessing the
No.
value of a house.
But I really think that we haven't been capturing the growth.
Well, that would be a whole different issue, though. A reassessment won't do anything to
But I
that.
think that a reassessment still is.
But they do it on every 3 years, I
Do a
think.
full, yeah, do
Yeah,
a full
every 3 years.
town-wide, and then every 3 years do a third.
They do a third every 3 years.
Because we might be at our, I mean, we're at our levy, we can't do more than
Right.
2.5% based on history, but we are nowhere near our ceiling, and new growth is outside the levy.
Right, new growth.
What was the objection, and yeah, I can't even to Glendale, that they had the Board of Assessors in that?
I didn't quite understand.
I didn't quite
Mr.
understand it
Swanson's
either. So,
argument, other than I said he was not an attorney.
Well, new growth for this year is $200,000.
so
For
what,
15.
many of those questions can be answered through the Board of Assessors.
And then
So,
what's our percentage that we're assessing at, is it like, is that 99%?
I have no idea.
Well, they said-
That was my question as well. He said they were
Good question.
assessing at the max.
They shoot for 100, they usually get in close to 99%.
From what they said, they assess at 100, then it goes through a DOR formula that kicks it down a little bit, but supposedly they're putting in at the maximum value of the house, the 100%.
Typically, you can go to 110. I mean, they'll say that DOR doesn't like that, but DOR won't. It's been done before in Mass, and
I'm not sure if there's positions open on the Board of Assessors, but that knowledge.
but that's not why she's on the agenda tonight, so just hold that thought.
I know that, but I
I'm
mean,
saying, like, if DOR came and we showed them
Somebody else trying to grab her hand.
our assessed values right now, and they could see how under-assessed we were, and historically, how under-assessed we are, I think if we pushed it to 110, we would have a really good argument.
we should, if that's the case, should we bring in the Board of Assessors and have a meeting?
I think we should have a joint
And
meeting with
if
the
you're
Board of
willing to join
Assessors.
us.
But also have.
You let us know when you're
Let me
available.
bring some friends.
Any of you want.
Have someone tell us exactly how to do that.
I've gotten some qualitative opinions on it.
All right.
So the next pages that you have is a rough draft that Heather's put together on a budget for the fiscal 16 budget.
The schedule?
You mean the schedule?
What did I say?
You said the actual budget.
Oh, no,
This is
just a
the-
schedule. Sorry, I'm getting a little
So
tired.
this is what you were asking for, Francine. It's a little bit behind schedule only because we're already in November. I can't backtrack till October. If I did, I'd already have budget proposals before us, and this conversation would be moot.
That's good.
So we figured it would be wiser to try to not rush this process, since if we're changing anything at all, people take a while to adjust to things, and we want to do it right, so it's better off if it's a little bit behind where we'd like to be, for the purposes of going through the correct processes and path first time.
So from the Board of Selectmen, this is what I need to know. Who do you want to be in charge of this budget process this year? Do you want to adopt this schedule, or would you like to make any changes to it? And we need to create some parameters for the fiscal 16 budget and a budget letter that expresses what those expectations are from us.
I think Heather needs to be back involved with working with the finance, so that sort of structure is in place. We've already talked about that. As to set up what we expect for next year, it's kind of early on in the process to actually do that. I think there should be on the select board meeting what we feel are the most important aspects once we get a taste of what next year is going to look like. From what I understand, next year is going to look worse than this year, so it's probably level funding or less.
If you turn
So
to,
if you-
2 pages later than that.
If you look at the page that says budget overview, fiscal 16,
Actually, the newest handout, Liz, I think is the better one.
sorry, it says Town of Southampton, total proposed budget and analysis report for fiscal year 2016. Tammy, it looks like this.
Let's say minus 10%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can give folks a quick rundown on this, I guess. You wanna do it, really?
I'm gonna try.
Okay, I mark and take
I'm
go.
gonna try. Does everybody have that paper in front of them? Okay. So the first column you see says original budget. That's the original budget that we're operating under now for fiscal 15. The total of that column is $14,521,994.81. The second column is what's been expended so far through this year,
Up to October 2nd, so
up till October 2nd.
I started this a while back.
The very last column that says fiscal, should say fiscal 16.
It should say fiscal 16, yes, I apologize.
It should say fiscal 16 minus 10%. Now
No,
you'll,
fiscal 15 minus, that's right, because it's
Oh,
the
sorry.
current year minus 10%.
thank you.
But
The
that's
current
what it
year
is.
minus 10%.
That would be the fiscal year 16 budget.
Yes, yes.
You'll also notice in that middle column, you'll see Rs and LF. So the Rs, well, LS is level service. Rs is a reduced line. LF is level funded, and an I is increased. And an F in that line item is a fixed cost, not something that we can touch. So that last column is fiscal 15 minus 10%, and the total there is $15,657,315.73, which leaves approximately, even with a 10% cut, a $574,000 deficit.
And that's on good numbers on the revenue. One thing we were debating earlier, and Vicki, maybe perhaps you know the answer to this one. Off of the cherry sheet, when it's talking pertaining to school choice funds that come back, do they go directly to the school or do they stop at us?
School choice funds that are on the cherry sheet come directly back to the town.
So they do come to us. Okay, so then the revenue is relatively accurate at that
Oh,
point.
no, you're not talking assessments.
No,
You're talking the $460-some-odd thousand, no,
that goes right to the school.
The
So
assessment
so you're saying then the number that's on the cherry sheet that
$394,000, yeah, that doesn't come down.
Goes right
that
to the
talks
school.
to school choice, receiving tuition goes right to the school?
They get it.
Correct.
Okay, so in that case, the amount you see for our revenue is actually even less than that by approximately 364,000.
This is actually
So
closer to
deficit's more.
900,000?
So despite everything we said tonight, and all the bad management, by all what we've done in the past, we have a $900,000 deficit going into next year. How can we change that? By changing whatever we do going forward, unless we print money. I mean,
And I misspoke, I don't think you go to 110, I think you go to like 105 or 108, so.
but basically,
But I think that's your only saving grace.
right, but this has been the same story now since 2008. Every year, it's like we don't have enough money. And going into next year, it's $900,000 deficit.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
It says, fiscal year 20, original budget, 2015 was 14.5, right? In your first time?
Yep.
So how is 15,000,006, that number minus 10%?
So what happened, if you look to the right of that column, you see different words. So some of these things will say level funded, some will be up higher. So like if you look under elections, you go to the right, it's actually higher because I calculated in approximately each of the meetings that they have going on. You see level funded, again, the independent audit, the finance committee, total land, let's see, buildings and grounds, because essentially that's your electricity and the like, and you know that's not going down. And then you have, let's see, fire department's $150,000 more this year if we continue with our ALS service ambulance. We signed a contract, I believe last October, to sign on with the state in order to increase our ALS service for the town. Next year, what that would mean is come October of 2015, instead of being providing service from the hours of 8 to 5, Monday or Sunday through Saturday, it would be 8 to midnight
What
in the
hap-
same days.
So what happens if,
We would have to
decided
ask for
not to
grace
do
from
that?
the state in order to allow us to continue with the ALS level service,
and if they said no?
then we'd have an issue.
What would that issue be?
We would probably go back to basic level.
Does anybody know what that means?
So ALS is advanced.
Do you want me to explain that to you?
ALS
love-
service?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So your loved one's having an MI. Your loved one is having an MI.
Oh,
Heart
that's
attack.
even easier than the ALS.
What's an MR?
Marty,
Heart attack.
Oh.
Your loved one's having a heart attack. So if you're 70 and having an MI,
I'm the lunch lady.
if you're a little bit older having an MI, hopefully you have collaterals, which is other ways of perfusing your heart. But you're talking about someone who's having an MI in their 40s or 50s, they may not have those collaterals, so time is of the essence. So ACLS, they're able to do certain things to actually take care of the patient before getting them to the hospital directly. So time is myocardium. You used to put egg timers in the patient's chest when they came into the ER to see how long it took them to get from the door to the cath lab. They were counting minutes to save myocardium. So if you had BLS, what that would mean is that you would take longer to get to the hospital with less services in the beginning because you would have to hook up with Easthampton or another town that had ACLS to hook up that patient and transfer that patient. So myocardium is time. And so if you went from ACLS to BLS, you'd be giving less services to the citizens of the town.
Kind of going back to what we had before.
But that would be
No,
a
because we were
cut
intermediate
that
before.
we could do,
We had to-
because
we had to go
we've
back
done
to
it before.
So
Those
some
are
of the
some of the
studies,
hard decisions
some of the
that we
studies
need to
done in
make.
Minnesota where they had ACLS services, what they were doing was allowing the paramedics in the rigs to actually do a 12 lead and send it by a 12 lead to the ER. So they're coming in, say 45 minutes out, half an hour out to the ER. The EKG is sent telephonically by cell phone to the ER. The ER guy can see the ST segment elevation, which is acute MI. They're calling a cath team. So as the person's coming into the ER, the cath team's already there. They take them to the cath, they open up the coronary artery that's occluded, they save myocardium. So instead of having EF at 50%, instead of having an EF of ejection fraction of 15% because you have ischemic cardiomyopathy, a huge MI, or you're dead, they have a better life because their ejection fraction stays normal. They save myocardium. That's the difference. So when you guys talk about stuff, about streetlights, I think of kids walking around and, coming around, walking around in dark clothing at night with no streetlights and they get biffed. You talk about coming from ACLS to BLS, I think about a 45-year-old that becomes a cardiac cripple who has CHF for the rest of their life and less good days in their life. I mean, these are real decisions in my mind that I see. And that's what I bring to the board. I bring that sort of realism, the effects that we make here, the choices we make here, have direct effect on the most important things in our lives, which is our loved ones.
So here's what I'm gonna say. Looking at this budget going forward and noticing that there's a approximately $9 million deficit that we're talking about, and realizing that there's going to...
Not 9 million.
Sorry.
Don't give me a panic
I thought
attack.
you were gonna go home and just.
Wow. Yeah, and noticing that there's some real hard decisions that have to be made. I need to know from the board who they would like to be in charge of this budget.
Does the finance committee have you seen this schedule yet? Or is this the first? I mean,
It's the same issue.
having been on the finance committee, I think the finance committee needs, it's my word, needs more respect. And I think that they haven't been given it. But now we also have a full-time knowledgeable town manager. So I think the two of them working
Administrator.
together. Administrator. Well, we'll work on that later. I think the two of them need to work together in conjunction because I think they're two important parts. And so that's my opinion. I don't think it should be one or the other.
Jackie?
I feel the same way.
David?
I think I already said that, but I just, it's good to have, one of the things that happens when you have a town administrator is sometimes the board of selectmen gets a little more isolated. It'd be great to have Heather involved with the process, but we need to be there as well. Because in the end, the finance, this is where maybe you don't get the respect, or feel that way, is finance will present a budget to the board of selectmen, but then the board of selectmen has to make the hard choices we'll pay for this, we won't pay for that. And I think that's where maybe you don't feel like you were respected in finance, because in the end, we still had to make, this is where we had to make the cuts.
I don't think we made the right choices in the past.
Can I tell you what our opinion is?
Yes.
We would prefer if Heather and Vicky and Donna do the budget and we review it. And the finance team. Because, you know, we worked on it last year and you meet every single week and we don't have the authority to demand that department heads show up and provide us with information. And we had people that didn't come and came back. And she has the ability to be here during the day to go see a department head and say, hey, hand over your budget, or here are the things that you need to think about. And so it makes a lot more sense to us in the discussions we've had if she has the authority to do it, like the DLS report said, and then it comes to us so that we can review it and make our recommendations based on the information that she's obtained for us, because she has a much easier time getting it.
You're just gonna be like a review committee.
In conjunction with the team, and certainly our involvement.
Well, she
And I
gives
think
you,
the team was defined.
On the list, that
On the
Heather
list.
did a great job.
so she becomes the stick to help you guys do your job, because
We
you get the
want to be
budget.
involved, but she has a lot more authority.
Here's the thing,
and
if you want
ability and
department heads to
availability.
meet with you, and the finance committee is only available on Tuesday nights, but Heather is available all day long to meet with the police department, to meet with the fire department, to meet with people at different times, then she has the most time to do those things. She has access to that information at the most time. And like we talked about, I think if she were to set up an appointment with the police department, the fire department, the highway department, and then say to the finance committee, this is what time we're doing it, and on this day, will that work for you? And then have somebody there to have that conversation. I think that she should have a direction from the Board of Selectmen that says, here's what we need from you to come to this meeting to begin with. So, if it were me, and I was the only say, which I am not, I would say, whatever you are funded at for fiscal 15, I want your budget at fiscal 15 minus 10%. And that's what they go to her with, and that's what they give her. And then she brings that information to us, and we say yes, and we say no. And we have the finance committee with us, or Donna and Vicky with us, and then we make those conversations. But to put everybody through all of that information, it doesn't work, because you're trying to get everybody there at night when really they're available during the day. When Heather is available, when Vicky is available, when Donna is available. I think we need to make this more user-friendly rather than on a Tuesday night at 5:30, because the department heads are not coming then, and committee members are not coming then, and it's not working.
Can I just make a comment there on this information? It's really the best, assuming that everything is accurate, it's really the best information that we've had, and it really constitutes, you know, such a heads up for us going into the budget process. And this will drive things. We would look at people's budgets and their presentations, but there were no parameters around it. I mean, this is a very clear parameter that we begin with. I'm sure there will be others, you know, that come along the way, but this is a very good document to start with.
I think the finance committee is giving up a lot of good input that you could add to the process, but if you don't wanna do that, that's fine.
Well, we want to participate,
Yeah.
But
and
you
we
know-
want to review it, and we want to make our recommendations, but from our discussions as a committee, it's proven to be a very difficult thing, especially at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, asking people to come back or asking people to show up. I mean, you know, we had people not show up last year when we were trying to do budget, and then we were coming here and having joint meetings and relaying information to you. If Heather starts as the point person, and she can gather the information during the day, it's less at night when we get together having to sift through, because she has it, she's put it all together, and now she can say to all of you, here's what I've obtained. She can say to us, here's what I've been presented with, and we have an opportunity to look at it and have a meaningful conversation with you, as opposed to running through and having all these meetings and then sitting down 2 weeks before we're trying to get a budget in and say, what are we going to do now?
So would it make sense to follow the schedule that Heather had put together? And I'm just looking to see when the budgets are due to you on this calendar, Heather. If this were the...
Due to me?
Yeah.
So it kind of, the answer is it really depends on who they are. Let's
I
see.
guess my point would be that
So
where there's
major-
a select board meeting,
major
could
de-
we make those joint finance meetings with the Board of Selectmen to review any information that has been obtained through you up until that point?
Well, I think that's a good idea. I think what you have to remember, though, is at some point, it's gonna be an overwhelming amount of information. So perhaps at that point, if I may make a suggestion, just backtracking a little bit. Dawn and Vicky had a suggestion earlier that I think would be workable with everybody here, and that was essentially that Donna, myself, and Vicky could meet with, you know, all of the smaller departments, all of the committees and stuff like, you guys don't wanna talk about $1,000. I don't wanna talk about $1,000. So we'll meet with all the smaller departments, what have you, and then on a, essentially what I set up here, give or take, on a bi-weekly basis, we meet as a finance team anyway, to go over wherever we are with this, and we can even include a member of the Board of Selectmen on the finance team. That way there's a liaison, someone's actually in the loop the whole time. And then at the point where we get to the larger departments, which I believe are up here earlier on, they're January 13th, I believe.
Yep.
And that's because the larger ones are gonna be the ones where we're gonna have to amend them numerous times in order to figure out where we're really at. Those would be the ones that we would try to sit down with the whole finance committee from the get-go. So highway, police, fire, school departments. School departments you don't see till a little bit later on, because you know we're not gonna have their budget anytime soon. We already do have a somewhat draft budget of Norris, which is how I was actually able to calculate over here the approximate $10,316, or $316,613. If you looked at another sheet on here, I actually broke it out for you on the education piece. It's in the packet somewhere on one of the sheets. Can't tell you where at the moment. I think it's after the actual. Here it is, FY 2015, oh, it says Town of Aquinnah, please ignore that. I might have borrowed this from someone else. And it's FY 16, but essentially if you look down below and look up top, you can compare the two. So the top is the FY 15 budget currently as it is. Down below, the number should be FY 15, FY 16, I just got lazy with my numbers. So the first batch over here is the same numbers you see above, and the next batch to the right of that, if you're looking at the bottom section of this whole piece, is everyone on this page? Bottom section over here, these are the numbers as they would likely increase, and you have little comments on the right. So elementary school from Norris, according to their proposed budget that they have so far, they're saying it's level services. Notice it goes up over $100,000 for their level services, which is mostly salaries. School choice tuition, my wild guess was about $5,000, because if we're not putting more money into the schools, at some point, people are gonna continue to choice out. That would be my guess. Maybe it's illogical. I was just trying to get ahead of it. Local school transportation, even though we're in a contract for 5 years, there's always the cost of living increase, so I figured 2% increase there.
Wait, can I ask a
Yes,
question?
ma'am.
Does that local school transportation put in the money that we took out last year, or does it still eliminate the line?
I believe that's exactly 2% from the 194.
So it still eliminates that funding in the
We
line?
did not add it in, nope. Charter school tuition, increased it by 4,000. Charter schools are weird. Essentially what happens is, if you figure it's a 4-year period, for each year that someone goes to the charter school, we get reimbursed less each year. So it costs us more for each subsequent year that they
One
attend.
child that started in kindergarten at a charter school, and that's what that $11,000 is for.
One child?
Vocational tuition, last year, as they were saying earlier, we ended up paying rather $833,000, assuming all the kids were going. 6 kids said they weren't. Well, what does that mean? You have a graduating class this year, so you lose some kids, but then you have this wonderful concept called freshmen. We don't know how many we're gonna get. This year, we had an overwhelming number, which was crazy. Next year, maybe we will, maybe we won't, but we still have that huge number of kids who will be sophomores next year. Even with the amount of seniors that we lose, it's not gonna be that big, and if the tuition goes up, well, we'll just start crying now. Vocational transportation, again, 2% cost of living, and then Hampshire Regional, I have no idea how much they're going to increase. I met with them last week, and they asked what our input was, and I asked them to level fund. That's what I'd really like. I don't think they're gonna observe that concept. If you look over the past couple of years, they're all over the place. One year they were 11% increase, one year they were 3.6% increase, one year they were 5%. It just varies year to year. If we have the right representation, hopefully that will be enough to sway them, and hopefully communicating with the other communities will also keep them in check. Net school spending is one thing, and that's where we should be, but going above anything we could ever pay, it will just cream us.
The other piece of that, Heather, don't forget when they mentioned last week, is that if kids from Goshen and Williamsburg drop out and go to Hampshire, we end up paying the bigger portion of that assessment, even though it's less. Because we will have the bigger portion of the kids.
So, Mrs. Walunas?
The other thing is, November 2nd was the Smith Vocational Open House. There were a lot of 8th graders there.
You sure they were, Southampton?
Yes, there were.
Did you ID them all? Residents.
Most of them were Southampton residents.
I think that that's good information, and my guess is there probably is always a lot of kids at the open house, you know, just to get an idea and cross your fingers.
One of the suggestions that Vicki and Donna had earlier, and this is something I think we need to think about, because as we've talked about earlier, in the current fiscal state we're in, I don't think we can leave any stone unturned. But one of the concepts that came up was looking at other possible vocational schools that maybe have a lower tuition.
They looked at Westfield in the past. One kid had to go to Westfield because it wasn't offered at Smith. A few years back, we had to get transportation, take that one person over. It was like $40,000 a year.
But if all of our kids who didn't go to Hampshire went to Westfield instead of Smith, it would be a group transportation.
Yeah, I just don't
But
know.
it depends on the school, what they offer at those schools. If Westfield doesn't offer cosmetology, if someone wants to do cosmetology or
That's why
agriculture
that one kid
instead,
went over there. The kid, I forget what it was, but the kid went
they
over
have
there.
an excellent machine shop over there.
HVAC, I think.
HVAC and, yeah, they have great CNC machines.
But they
And Smith
discontinued
Voc
that
has
program.
increased their number of programs that they're
Yes,
offering now.
they did add a couple of new ones, didn't
Yes,
they?
they did.
Well, can't we restrict what school they go to? I didn't think we could.
No. And we have to pay for them to go to.
Right.
So I would like to know if, do you want a motion to who's gonna be in charge? Do you need motions for all this?
Well, I think it would be very helpful moving forward if we have any concern from folks who are working with us as to
So-
what the process actually is, that we have something on
So
record.
we're gonna do this one step at a time. I would like a motion from the board as to who they would like to be the point person for the fiscal 16 budget.
Point person from where?
I think maybe a little
Make a
more,
motion
I would,
that Heather is the point person for the
Yeah.
budget,
Thank
working in
you.
conjunction with Vicki and Donna and with, finance as a,
That's perfect, thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Check. Given that you,
Motion, I would
thank
make a motion to accept the schedule as that was drafted. You want to know how to go forward, right?
yes, that's exactly, keep going.
I'm just
I know,
moving
keep
along.
going. You're right on track. You're doing a great job.
All right, so I'd make a motion to accept the schedule, not as an outline, knowing that there'll be some fluctuations in the dates, tornadoes, hurricanes, and snowstorms, but in general, this concept moving forward.
please note the bottom says calendar is subject to change without notice.
Thank you.
Second.
There's a motion, a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And the second part, given the information that we've looked at and the deficit that we are facing with that number, I would accept a motion to,
Make a motion for a 2.5 override for $1 million next year.
given that that's not quite enough, I would accept a motion to have departments submit their budgets the same as fiscal 15 minus 10%.
So I would just ask one thing, is I think you need to go back to the past 5 years and see how many years have been level funded or level funded minus 5% to see where we're trending to. Because I think when you're gonna say level funded minus 10%, that's gonna be very difficult for the department heads.
Well, plus, it's maybe just me, but, you know, just going on the budget we have this year and saying minus 10% or plus 10%, I don't think is accurate, because the big departments get the biggest benefit or the biggest hit. I mean, you should do a zero-based cost budget, have people justify what they need, because there are certain things that they have funding for this year that they don't need it for next year, and vice versa.
I find it very hard to believe that somebody's gonna tell you something they have this year they don't need next year.
But they have to justify it. I mean, zero-based budgeting makes you lay it all out and justify it.
And has that been what we've done in the past?
Just last year.
So the recommendation from DLS was if you're gonna do anything outside of the reduction budget, would be to do a level funded budget and a reduction budget, to submit two budgets. This year, we're trying to, I've been working a little bit with Francine. I think Francine and I met on this to go over my budget preparations. And essentially, what we're trying to do is make it very simple for departments. This is what you spent last year, you know, here's a history of the past several years for all the departments, so you can check it out. And then for your line items, what can you give us? We're gonna ask several questions on them. You may have to bring in backup material, and you know, if we're meeting with these departments, a lot of times, you know, we can print out, there's only 4 line items, so we can print out 4 line items worth of the past 4 years if we want. To go over, you know, what physical purchases they've actually made and see if it's justifiable or not.
So then the first decision the board needs to make is, do you want them to submit a level funded budget or a zero-based budget?
So,
It's just a way of developing it, that's all, yeah.
can I just ask another question?
Yes.
If you added the 10% back in, what was the deficit instead of?
So if you,
saying deficit right now is like 800 and some odd thousand for this, something for the school. So the deficit now is $800,000. If you added in the 10% that we sort of level funded, what would the deficit be? Just out of curiosity.
much larger.
Okay, thank you.
It depends, some of these items are level funded already on here.
But would the deficit be over $1 million?
Yes.
Where did you get the revenue numbers from, first of all, because I'm not quite sure, I didn't think
No.
sure.
I took them off cherry sheets.
So you don't have any miscellaneous receipts in there, like building department,
Yeah, I do.
all that
Yep.
stuff is included in there, so.
Yes, ma'am.
All
We
that
should
stuff.
be at the average, our revenue for the past 5 years, which would give a prediction for the
Be an
next
average
year.
of the last.
I took most of the revenues from the annual town reports. Well, I took whatever I could, and then I grabbed the rest.
If the town accountant hasn't seen this, maybe the town treasurer, wouldn't it be good to have people meet before we go on these numbers? No offense, but just seems like everybody should.
I'm not saying they're wrong, I just,
No,
I
I-
just don't know where they're.
I'd rather you say, yeah, they're on, and Donna say, yeah, and the finance committee say, yeah, everybody's in agreement.
Okay, so that being said, Heather will be the point person for the budget. And can we put on the agenda for next week so that Donna has a chance to check these numbers, where we want to see the budgets go?
So what you want is a level funded budget, a 5% and then a 10% reduced budget. So you need 3 budgets, because then it gives you some playing around with the department heads. You know, level funded, the best, which is not really that good, a 5 and 10 reduction. Because you don't, this is a moving target right now. Heather's saying 10%, but maybe it's 7%.
So let's have Vicky take a look at these revenue numbers and double check with Heather, make sure we're in the
Yeah,
same place.
I mean, some of those, you know, like Heather took off the cherry sheets, we can only go by what we had last year, so if those are cut, then.
So let's revisit this conversation on
Great.
Tuesday night. Okay.
Can I say something else about this?
Sure.
On the budgets, if we go with fiscal 15 minus 10%, that's unfair in a way because, for instance, utilities have gone up 20%.
Yeah.
And they're all in Heather's budget, so if she's got a budget minus 10%, she'll never be able to make up that 20%
It's,
utility.
no, we took it out. If, you won't see it necessarily on this, but what I did a lot of times for this year was I actually separated things out whenever we could. So you actually, it's under building and,
Well, if that's what's
building
gonna-
and land use, I believe.
As long as
So,
we keep that in our mind, because you're gonna cripple some departments because they have certain expenses that they can't.
Well, that was one of the things I raised the other day, was that maybe energy costs should be outside their budget. I mean,
Absolutely.
so like fuel costs, electricity and heat should be separate energy costs that the town pays for.
In a administrative budget. I mean,
Like, you know, whatever budget you wanna call, cause then the police chief is then just dealing with wages and whatever he needs for supplies, and he's not dealing with wages, supplies, and God, gas went up to $5 a gallon.
So can,
But isn't that part of how he has to manage his budget?
well, he can't manage
Can't
utility
control
bills.
it. It's
He
out of
can't
his
manage
control,
electric.
he can't.
How you have to sort of ease the burden, so I think the fuel cost should be averaged over the town. So then when the police chief says, well, I have no money, I'm gonna cut back patrols, but, because I can't pay for the gas, you take that argument away
You're
from
talking
them.
about gasoline though.
Yes,
I'm talking about gas for utilities.
I'm talking all energy
Well,
costs.
he can manage gasoline for his department, that's up to him.
No,
I
no,
mean,
I'm saying take it away from them, take the fuel, we buy it by the rack price for the town garage, and it should be managed by the town by a separate amount.
Just reallocate it back.
You just separate amount, this is what we do.
So the police fills
So
up
you would take
the-
the average amount that it costs to fill the gas tanks of the highway department, the police department, and anybody else, and take that average amount over 5 years and put it in a separate account.
Yes.
And then anytime anybody buys gas, they would submit that receipt and it would come out of that account.
And who's accountable for it?
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
But you, so you.
And then what do you do when it's
Well,
gone?
it's a
Who pays for
it's
it?
a philosophical question. Do you want someone to say, I have a patrolman sitting in the police department, and I can't send him out because my budget's so tight, I can't afford the 10% cut, because the 10% cut, all I've got left is wages
Right?
Well,
to
we don't
cut, I
have
can't
anything
cut
there,
out.
'cause you'd have
Yeah, you can.
like,
All I can cut is fuel.
Well, you can cut the wages. I mean,
Well,
we're using the police chief as an example.
But
I don't-
I'm
I don't wanna do that.
trying to talk about rethinking how we allocate money for resources, and if we take energy costs, which are variable, and place it on the general town ledger and out of the departments, and then the department heads manage what they can, which is wages and supplies.
The gasoline to
But
me
then
is not,
who's
don't take that.
accountable for saying that, who manages that account?
And when that finite amount of money is depleted, then
What do you do?
I think it's each department, except, I agree with you about utilities.
Yeah.
Each department's manager's responsibility to, however they, deploy the highway trucks or whatever, the efficiency with which they schedule to the best of their ability, I think is, they know that best.
But what happens
But then
is,
give somebody like a free pass,
it's not a free pass though.
well,
But you're taking that money, so what ends up happening is you take, so right now, say, just using, just for numbers, say it's $100,000 in the police department for fuel cost. You take it out. So now, say, I'm just not making up another, I'm making up another amount of money, it's $200,000. So now we tell them to make a 10%, a level funded 10% cut. Okay, he can do that with wages and with supplies and stuff, because he has control over that. Right now, gas prices are low, fuel costs are down. But when that fuel cost goes up, he's got no control over that.
He has control
Take it
how
out
much
of
he
it.
uses.
Excuse me?
He has control how much he uses, though, doesn't he?
You don't wanna lose accountability.
Right.
I just think you want to take that out of the equation so that the police run the streets, that's all.
We need to move on. So, Vicki and Heather, is it fair to say that you guys can check those revenue numbers and come back with a
Yes.
more clear sheet on Tuesday night? And then we can move forward on what the parameters are that we want department heads to begin their budgets with. Is there any other budget-related information or questions that anyone would like to talk about tonight? Hearing none.
I actually have two quick things. Number one, in the packet, you also just see a template real quick for the capital improvement budget request. We need to get back into putting together a capital improvement plan. I'm actually working on getting them to meet. I have been
Is there a committee still?
short of stocking a few of the members and in the process of getting another one to submit his I'd like to be a member thing, which should be on the agenda for next week. The last thing is just a template, a draft of a letter for a budget for this year. It was just taking from some other departments, other communities that I saw. This is not necessarily the in-play letter. I just wanted you guys to have it to see a template of what other communities do to make sure they give clear direction to their boards, departments. I modified a few things, but mostly some things just to point out on here. What a lot of communities do is they actually point, when they're going into the budget prep, their department heads to look at reviewing of fees and charges, assessing the efficiencies in their departments, whether they're really in the business of doing this. Are there programs or services that have been historically provided that may not be essential or are now obsolete? Are you meeting service level expectations within your department budget? If not, what resources would you need to address this? Are there services or functions in your department that can be outsourced for a lesser cost? Can services be feasibly combined with another department, organization, or community? Consider these options to help meet your budget targets. So these are just some things. I did not make up these questions. I do not have that much time on my hands. I'm not that creative. I simply adopted these from other communities in a few different formats of responses I got. On the budget directive under salaries, I just took a guess as to where the board would be on this. Right now, we have 3 open contracts, or at least they will be open as of, I think it's either June and July 1st. Either way, it will affect us next fiscal year. Right now, they're all at 2%, but they'll all be open by then. Those are just some things to consider.
So if the board could read over that letter and make any changes or suggestions to it before next Tuesday, that would also be helpful.
Send it directly to Heather?
Yes, please. Jackie?
I would just like to say, Heather, thank you for giving us that last form. It was very interesting. But before you meet with the department head, could you, if you're suggesting any changes in the department, could you talk to us first? Just because, you know.
I don't know if we would have any changes that we would suggest ahead of time.
Right.
So I think the purpose of, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, my understanding is what we'd be charged with doing, myself and the finance group, is to actually present a balanced budget to the Board of Selectmen.
Yes.
So my job, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is to work with the group of folks that I've been matched up with to present to the Board of Selectmen a balanced budget based on the parameters that the Board of Selectmen gave us.
Yes.
So if they say you need to cut this, or these are the priorities, you need to cut that, you need to do that, we'll make sure that it falls in that parameters, and we'll give you a pretty balanced budget. If the Board of Selectmen, upon its table, if they want to change something, that's the Board of Selectmen's directives. But I think checking in with the Board of Selectmen every time I meet with a department head would actually interfere with the process. I do work for the Board of Selectmen, so it's up to the board and how they wish for me to proceed, but that's just my concern.
I think she should collect the information and then bring it to us, and that's where we see.
And then we talk to the
Yes.
board, the department heads, right?
Yes.
Great, that's what I'm saying.
But I think there's 2 different processes here. I think the process moving forward, because I've heard what the finances have said, and I never read the Gazette article, I read the Gazette. I think we've already sort of made a motion and voted on for Heather, Vicky, Donna, and Finance to produce a budget. And then when that budget's done, it's presented to us to look at. I think that's what we're talking about.
Right.
Not every time they
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just procedures that they might have in their departments, even, above and beyond the budgets, that before she says, change this or do that she should come to us and talk about it.
But that's not exactly what we sort of said. We sort of said, do a budget.
No, I'm not talking about budgets. I'm just talking about procedures that the department heads have been following for years and years, general procedures, and.
Do an example.
Yeah, but I just don't want.
Here's what I'm gonna say. If there's
and I just want people to feel comfortable.
If there's a budget that you're interested in, I would say that those meetings are not closed to the Board of Selectmen. If you wanted to be in on that and you wanted to hear what was going on, then I would say, I'm sorry, Heather, could you please tell me when the police department is meeting with the finance committee? I'd like to be there. I want to see when the library is meeting. I'd like to be there. And then make yourself available to their schedule if that's a priority for you.
Why don't you just give it to the board at all these meetings? And
That's also a great idea.
Yeah, so we know if there's a budget we're interested in, we can just go on it.
Right.
But I think when we task them to do the job.
Yeah, absolutely.
My guess is, though, when you sit down and you say, okay, these Board of Selectmen says you gotta go fiscal 15 minus 10, there's not gonna be a whole lot of, okay, let's do this. It's gonna, so I get a feeling she's coming back to us anyways, because the department heads report to the board. So there's gonna be that, I wanna talk to the board on this, and we need to support her, doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other budget conversations?
I have a question, but Vicky stepped out, she might know off the top of her head. If you could ask on Tuesday, like with school choice, like we have a number of school choice students at Norris, and I know that the school choice fund at this regional where that manages our money, that's a fund that rolls over every year and it's a discretionary account. So I would just be curious to know if the school choice student income that we're getting, the revenue, if it's staying at Norris or can it be used for?
I think it's staying at Norris.
We know that?
I'm
Almost
pretty,
positive.
I think until they move up to the high school, it stays at Norris.
Okay.
So
Pretty sure it stays there.
once you leave Norris, then that revenue goes to the high school, and then it becomes part of their school choice revolving
It
fund.
does.
Now, whether it goes to some of the other elementary schools, what's the other elementary school that's out there? It's part of the regional.
West Hampton.
So Norris is not part of the regional, so there's an elementary school that's part of the regional. I don't know if that school of choice funds that are at the high school then are put into a general budget that sort of supports the elementary school. I can't answer that question. I know that money does not come to our school, Norris, because
And the
it's not
Norris
part-
money does not go to the high school.
It's two separate budgets, two separate schools.
You're welcome to come back next week, too.
Well, hold on, because she's item 1522. So we have an appointment to the planning board of Paul Fergal.
Yes.
He's interested in being on the planning board because,
Well, I was just gonna say, I told him he didn't have to be here tonight, because I didn't know how long it would be. But he comes highly recommended from the planning board and John Furman himself as his next predecessor.
so
John,
I would
that's
accept a
on us.
motion to appoint Paul Fergal to the planning board.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now,
Can we send a letter of recognition to John Furman? He really stepped above and beyond
that'd be a
all
great idea.
qualifications, his duties, not only with the planning board, but when we first started the public safety committee, he spent a lot of time formatting the town report. So
How about I draft something and the board can perhaps sign it next week?
it's
That would be
presented.
excellent.
Do we have certificates of appreciation, anything like
We
this?
just kind of do them after we.
Really?
Well, we can't buy them because we don't have the money, but we could probably print them out.
Be very fancy paper.
The next is to the finance committee. The first person is Shannon Cutler. However, Shannon is the assistant assessor currently, and per our bylaws, the finance committee, it says, the committee shall be elected as provided in section 2 of this article, and no person holding other elective or appointive office shall be eligible to serve on said committee. Therefore, unfortunately, Shannon Cutler is not available to be appointed to the finance committee tonight. However, Sharon Wojcik back there is
Motion to appoint
The
Sharon.
mouthy one. I will say, I would like to say publicly that I think I misspoke. I don't think you can go up to 110, but I think you can go up to 105, 108. I don't want people spending half their day tomorrow trying to disprove me. But, and I know that people will be pretty angry with that. Like, you sounds like you might have some dissension already with the assessor, not wanting to go above the 99 or 100% threshold. I just think it's worth looking into, and I think that we could have more discussions.
Do I have a second to appoint her?
Second?
There's a motion to appoint. Is there a second?
I think that's something when you're on the finance committee.
And I know that my personal taxes are going to increase with this idea, and I'm just hurting my, but it's the right thing to do for the town.
Someone actually came in and paid the 2.5% difference on their home.
I have a motion, a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Sharon, for stepping up.
That's 2 years.
Thank you.
Amanda asked me.
I want to hear you after 6 months.
I would also accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a
Second.
second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, before you leave, just look over and sign the docs.